They say an Omega's fate is sealed the moment she's born. I believed that too, until the night my fated mate looked me in the eyes and spat the words that shattered me. I reject you. In front of thousands, in front of the entire kingdom. I was nothing, a broken thing, dragged to the borderlands to die alone in the cold. But they made one mistake. They left me alive. This is the story of how the weakest Omega became the thing alphas fear most. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city. Let's see where you're watching from. The bonfire roared against the night sky, its flames twisting and writhing like living serpents, reaching for the stars that dotted the winter darkness. Around it, the gathered clans of the northern territories stood shoulder to shoulder, hundreds upon hundreds of wolves, maybe close to 1,000, their eyes gleaming amber and gold and green in the firelight, their breath rising in white clouds against the frozen air that bit at exposed skin. The smell was overwhelming, almost dizzying. Pine smoke thick enough to choke on, roasted venison dripping fat into the flames with a sizzle and pop, wild herbs that had been thrown into the fire for ceremony, and underneath it all, threading through everything else, that sharp, unmistakable musk of dominance that clung to gatherings like this the way blood clings to a butcher's hands and never quite washes clean. The tribal gathering. It happened once every 5 years, when all the packs, Ironclaw, Shadowpeak, Riverbend, Stonefang, Silvermane, Northwind, and a dozen smaller clans whose names I could barely remember, came together under the winter moon to settle old grudges, forge new alliances, arrange marriages between powerful families, witness challenges for pack leadership, and above all else, to see the sacred bonding of fated mates. For most wolves, especially the young ones who'd never attended before, it was the most important night of their lives. A night when destinies were decided, when futures were written in blood and bond and sometimes broken bones, when nobodies could become somebodies if the moon smiled on them. For me, it became the night I learned that destiny could spit in your face and laugh while you bled out in front of everyone you'd ever known. I stood near the outer edge of the circle, pressed as far from the bonfire as I could manage without actually leaving the gathering grounds and risking offense to the elders. My fingers were twisted so tight into the rough, scratchy fabric of my cloak, the only warm thing I owned, and even it had holes, that my knuckles had gone bone white. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to break free and run away without the rest of me, which honestly seemed like a solid plan. Around me, other Omegas clustered in small, nervous groups, their voices bright with excitement that bordered on hysteria. They wore their best dresses, the ones they'd been saving for years, carefully folded away in trunks, embroidered by candlelight during long winter nights, and mended until the mending had mending. Some had flowers braided into their hair, despite the brutal cold, delicate winter blooms that must have cost them dearly to acquire. Sweet oils dabbed on their wrists and throats and behind their ears, filling the air with competing scents of lavender and rose and honeysuckle and something citrusy that made my nose itch. They wanted to be noticed, to be chosen, to catch an alpha's eye, and maybe, if the moon blessed them, feel the legendary snap of a mate bond that the old women spoke about in whispers. I just wanted to be invisible, to get through this night without incident and return to my corner of the Omega quarters where I could be ignored in peace. But the pull in my chest wouldn't let me hide, wouldn't let me breathe, wouldn't let me think about anything else. It had started 3 days ago, faint at first, just a tug, like someone had tied a string around my ribs and given it the gentlest pull. So subtle, I dismissed it as nerves. The gathering was a stressful time for Omegas. We were expected to be on our best behavior, to serve the visiting packs, to smile and lower our eyes and not cause problems. The pressure alone could make you feel strange things, but the pull grew stronger with each passing hour. Warmer, more insistent, more real. By the second day, it had become impossible to ignore. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, my skin too hot, my wolf, who'd been silent and dormant for so long I'd almost forgotten what her voice felt like, suddenly stirring and restless. "Mate," she whispered, over and over. "Mate, mate, mate, close, so close. Find him now." I tried to tell her she was wrong, that she was confused, that Omegas like us didn't get fated mates. We got assignments. We got handed off to pack houses like furniture being distributed, given to whoever needed someone to cook their meals and clean their floors and warm their beds when they got the urge. We didn't get the bond. We didn't get the fairy tale. We didn't get choice. But she wouldn't listen. She'd never been this vocal before, never this certain. And now, standing here in the firelight with my stomach tied in knots so tight I felt sick and my skin buzzing with energy I didn't understand and couldn't control, I could feel him. Somewhere in this massive crowd, close, getting closer with every passing minute. My mate. The word felt foreign, dangerous, like something that shouldn't belong to me. Did you hear? The whisper came from my left. Two Omegas I vaguely recognized from the Riverbend pack, their heads bent close together. Hear what? The second one asked. About Alpha Kale. He's looking for a mate tonight. One of the betas from Ironclaw told me. Said he's under pressure from his council to produce an heir. My stomach dropped. Kyle Draven? The second Omega's eyes went wide. Are you insane? I'd rather die than bond with him. Shh! Keep your voice down. He's right over there. I don't care. Everyone knows what he is, what he's done. What he's done is make Ironclaw the most powerful pack in the territories. Alphas from 3 kingdoms over respect him, fear him. Fear? Yes. Respect? She snorted. He's a monster. Killed his own father, remember? Tore out his throat in front of the whole pack when he was barely old enough to shift properly. That was a legal challenge. He was 18. What kind of son does that? And the things he did to Shadow Peak during the territory wars, burning their pack house with people still inside, that's just rumors. Is it? My cousin lives near the border. She saw the smoke for days, said the screaming. Would you two shut up? A third Omega hissed, pushing between them. Do you have a death wish? If he hears you? But I'd stopped listening. My eyes scanned the gathered wolves, searching despite myself. The alphas stood at the front, naturally, a wall of broad shoulders and rigid spines, their postures screaming territorial pride even here, on supposedly neutral ground. They wore furs and leather, and most had weapons strapped to their backs, even though the gathering was meant to be peaceful. Old habits. Or maybe wolves just didn't trust easily, especially not alphas, who spent their whole lives fighting for dominance. Warriors, leaders, killers, most of them. Men who could crush your skull with their bare hands and sleep soundly afterward. I felt so small looking at them, so breakable, like I was made of glass and they were all made of stone and iron. And then I saw him, Kyle Draven, Alpha Warlord of the Ironclaw Pack, the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. Some said the most powerful pack in the entire kingdom, though the southern clans would argue that point with blood if necessary. He stood dead center of the Alpha gathering, exactly where someone of his status belonged, arms crossed over his chest, expression carved from ice and entirely unreadable. Tall, taller than most of the other alphas by at least a head, which meant he had to be 6'4", maybe 6'5". Shoulders broad enough to block out the firelight when he shifted his weight. Dark hair fell just past his jaw, and even from this distance I could see his eyes. Winter steel, the color of a blade fresh from the forge, cold and sharp and utterly, terrifyingly empty of anything resembling warmth. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. It wasn't just his size, though that was intimidating enough. It was something else, something that made the air around him feel heavier, made other wolves, even other alphas, unconsciously lean away when he moved. Give him space. Defer. I'd heard the rumors, of course. Everyone had. Kale Draven didn't just lead his pack. He dominated it with an iron fist that crushed anyone who questioned his authority. He was ruthless, calculating, and colder than the northern winds that howled through the mountain passes in the dead of winter. The stories followed him like carrion birds. That he'd killed his own father in single combat to take the alpha seat when he was barely 18, still young enough that some thought it was a joke, until he'd torn out the old alpha's throat and stood there dripping blood while he waited for anyone else to challenge him. No one had. That he'd razed 3 rival packs to the ground during the territory wars 5 years ago, burned their lands, and salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. A message. A warning. That he took lovers when the mood struck, male or female, it didn't matter, and discarded them just as easily, sometimes with broken bones as parting gifts if they displeased him or got too clingy. That he'd once ripped a beta's arm off for stealing from the pack stores. Just tore it clean from the socket and beat the man with it until he stopped moving. That he smiled when he killed. Actually smiled. I didn't know which stories were true and which were exaggerated. Probably some of both. But looking at him now, standing there like a monument to violence barely contained, I believed all of it. He was brutal, calculating, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with the kind of mind that could plot your destruction and sleep peacefully afterward. He was everything I'd spent my life trying to avoid. And the bond? Oh God, the bond. It wrapped around me like iron chains, yanking me toward him with a force that made my knees actually buckle. I had to grab the shoulder of the Omega next to me to stay upright. "Hey, watch it!" she snapped, jerking away. "Sorry," I mumbled. "Sorry, I just—" But she'd already turned back to her friends, dismissing me. My wolf was going absolutely insane, throwing herself against my ribs, howling and clawing and demanding I go to him right now. She didn't understand fear or social hierarchy or the very obvious fact that someone like Kael Draven would never want someone like me. "Mate!" she screamed. "Mate! Go! Go now! He's ours! No, not him. Anyone but him." I tried to step back, to melt into the shadows, to disappear into the crowd before he noticed me. Before this went any further. Before... His head turned, slowly, deliberately, like he'd heard my thoughts, scented my fear. Our eyes met across the firelight and the crowd and the impossible distance that separated an Omega with no name and no pack and no value from the most powerful Alpha in the territories. And I watched his expression shift, just for a heartbeat, just for the space of a single breath. Surprise flickered across his face, genuine surprise, like whatever he'd been expecting. It wasn't this, wasn't me. His nostrils flared slightly, and I knew with horrible, sinking certainty that he felt it too. The bond snapping into place like a padlock turning. Click, done. Permanent, written in something deeper than blood or choice. For one stupid, desperate, pathetic second, hope bloomed in my chest like a flower in the snow. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe the bond would change him. Maybe being fated mates meant something, even between an Alpha like him and an Omega like me. Maybe... Then his face went completely blank. Empty. The surprise vanished like it had never existed. He looked at me the way you'd look at dog shit on your boot, like I was something unpleasant that had appeared in his path. An inconvenience. A mistake. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up right there in front of everyone. "No. No. Please." "Alpha Kael." The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife through silk. Elder Thorn stepped forward, a gnarled old wolf with more winters behind him than most of us would ever see, his back bent with age and old injuries that hadn't healed quite right. Silver streaked his beard and the long hair he kept braided. Ceremonial furs draped over his bent shoulders, and he carried a staff carved with the symbols of all the major pacts, a reminder that he spoke for tradition itself. When he struck the staff against the frozen ground, the sharp crack echoed across the gathering. Conversations died. Heads turned. The drumming that had been providing background rhythm stumbled and stopped. Silence fell like a blanket. "The moon has blessed you with a mate bond," Elder Thorn announced, his voice cracking with age but still carrying the weight of authority, of law. "Come forward and claim what is yours by sacred right, by the laws written before the first packs walked these lands." The gathered wolves shifted, murmuring, first looking at Kael, then following his gaze to me. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me at once. I felt every single one like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, crushing me into the frozen ground. My hands started shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs, trying to hold still, trying not to run screaming into the darkness like every instinct was telling me to do. Kael didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with those cold, dead eyes that gave away absolutely nothing. The silence stretched. Uncomfortable. Wrong. "Alpha?" Elder Thorn prompted, uncertainty creeping into his tone now. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. When a bond was recognized, the Alpha claimed his mate. Always. It was tradition, law, the way things had been done for thousands of years. Kael's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek, the only sign that he was even thinking about this and not just staring at a wall. Then, slowly, so slowly it felt like torture, like time had turned thick and syrupy, he walked forward. Not toward me, toward the center of the circle, toward the bonfire. His boots crunched over the frozen ground, each step deliberate and measured. The crowd parted for him like he was diseased, like getting too close might contaminate them. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe too loud. He stopped just a few feet from the flames, close enough that the firelight turned his face into harsh planes of shadow and gold, making him look even more like a statue than a living person. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire gathering like a blade cutting through silk. Clear, cold, final. I reject her. 3 words. 3 simple words. They hit me like a warhammer to the chest, driving all the air from my lungs. The crowd exploded. Gasps, shouts. Someone screamed, actually screamed in shock. Someone else laughed, a sharp, vicious sound that cut through the chaos like broken glass dragged across skin. Did he just... a rejection? At the gathering? I've never, in all my years, is that even allowed? Look at her. Oh, spirits, look at her face. What did she expect? She's nobody. Probably born in a ditch somewhere. Their voices crashed over me like waves in a storm, each one pushing me further under until I was drowning in sound and shame and a pain so profound it didn't feel real. You... what? Elder Thorne's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with shock. Alpha, the mate bond is sacred, blessed by the moon herself. Written in the fabric of our very existence. You cannot simply... I can. Kael's voice cut him off, sharp and dismissive. His eyes found mine again, and this time there was something in them, not warmth, not regret, just cold, calculating dismissal, like he'd done the math, and I didn't add up. She's weak, low-born, unworthy of the Ironclaw name. I will not bind myself to dead weight that will drag down my pack and my bloodline. Dead weight. The words echoed in my skull, bouncing around until they were all I could hear. The bond flared in my chest, bright and burning and desperate, like a living thing trying to claw its way out of my ribcage. My wolf threw herself against my bones, howling in confusion and agony and betrayal. She didn't understand. She couldn't comprehend why our mate, our fated mate chosen by the moon and destiny, and forces older than language, was pushing us away. Why? She screamed. Why doesn't he want us? What's wrong with us? Fix it. Fix it now. But there was nothing to fix. Nothing I could do. Nothing I could say. I was exactly what he'd called me. Weak, low-born, worthless. Kael. I didn't mean to say his name. It just fell out of my mouth, broken and small and pathetic. A plea I didn't even know I was making. His expression didn't even flicker, didn't soften by the smallest degree. If anything, his eyes went colder. I, Kael Draven, Alpha of Ironclaw, formally reject Nyra Hale as my mate before the moon and these assembled witnesses. Let the bond be severed. Let it be as if it never existed. The formal words hit differently than the casual dismissal. They had power, weight, and the bond screamed. Pain exploded through my chest, blinding, white-hot, unbearable pain that had nothing to do with flesh and everything to do with soul. It felt like something vital was being ripped out of me by the roots, like my spirit was tearing in half, right down the middle. The bond thrashed and clawed, refusing to let go, refusing to accept this, fighting with everything it had to hold on. But it wasn't enough. I felt it tear, felt the exact moment it shredded apart like wet paper. My wolf's howl of anguish rang through my head so loud I thought my skull would split. My knees hit the frozen ground hard enough to send shockwaves of pain up my spine and rattle my teeth. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world had narrowed to a single point of agony behind my sternum, white and burning and endless. Around me the crowd erupted again, louder now. Did you see? She actually collapsed. Bond rejection, that's what that looks like. I've only read about it in the old texts. Looks painful. Good. She should hurt. Presumptuous little thing, thinking she deserved him. What did she expect, honestly? An alpha like Kael Draven with a nobody? Doesn't even have a proper pack name. Hale. That's just a placeholder name for orphans. Probably some stray who wandered in years ago. Look at her dress. I've seen beggars dressed better. Poor thing doesn't even... Their voices crashed over me like waves, each one a fresh cut. I tried to stand, tried desperately to hold on to some shred of dignity, to not completely fall apart in front of 1,000 witnesses. But my legs had turned to water. My vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. The pain made it hard to focus on anything else. Rough hands grabbed my arm and yanked me upright with enough force to nearly dislocate my shoulder. "Get up," someone growled. I looked up through tears I didn't remember crying and saw a beta from Kael's pack, a broad-faced man with a scar that cut across his nose and down to his upper lip, turning his sneer into something even uglier. His grip on my arm was bruising. "You're embarrassing yourself," he snarled, loud enough that people nearby could hear. "And you're embarrassing our alpha by making a scene." I didn't... My voice came out as a rasp, barely recognizable as my own. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want..." "No?" He laughed, low and mean, and shook me hard enough to rattle my brain. "Then what the fuck are you doing here? You thought you were good enough for him? You thought an alpha like Kael Draven, a warlord, would want a stray mutt with no bloodline, no value, no use beyond scrubbing floors?" He shoved me, and I stumbled backward, barely catching myself. My hands scraped against the frozen dirt, tearing skin. "You should be grateful," another voice called out. One of the other Ironclaw wolves, a woman this time. "He could have accepted the bond and made your life a living hell. This is mercy." Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd. Mercy. They thought this was mercy. Kael had already turned away. Just like that. While I was still on the ground, still bleeding from a bond he'd shattered, still trying to remember how to breathe, he turned his back and walked toward the cluster of other alphas like nothing had happened. Like this was just another minor inconvenience in his evening. His posture was relaxed, his movements easy and confident. I meant nothing to him. Less than nothing. An insect he'd swatted away and immediately forgotten. Elder Thorn looked shaken. His hands trembled on his staff, and his face had gone from pale to almost gray. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is unprecedented," he finally managed, his voice thin. "The council will need to convene. There are laws, ancient protocols for situations like..." "The council," Kael said without bothering to turn around, his voice carrying despite the growing noise of the crowd, "can go fuck themselves sideways. The rejection is done. Witnessed. Legal. She's not my problem anymore, and she's sure as hell not Ironclaw's problem." More laughter, louder now. Not everyone. Some wolves looked genuinely uncomfortable, even sympathetic, their eyes sliding away from mine like they couldn't bear to watch. But enough people were laughing. More than enough. Enough to make me feel like I was drowning in shame. I forced myself to stand on legs that shook so badly I nearly went down again. My whole body trembled. The bond in my chest was quieter now, but it still hurt. A constant throbbing ache, like a wound that wouldn't close, that would probably never fully close. "Naira Hale." Elder Thorn's voice had gone formal. Stiff. The voice he used for passing judgment and delivering sentences. The voice that meant your fate was being decided and there was no room for argument. I looked up at him, and the pity in his ancient eyes made everything so much worse. I didn't want pity. I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. By the ancient laws of the gathering, witnessed by all clans here assembled under the winter moon, a rejected Omega forfeits her place within pack structure and protection. No, no. You are hereby stripped of pack rights and exiled to the outer territories. You have until dawn to gather whatever belongings you possess and leave these lands. If you are found within pack territory after sunrise, you will be killed on sight. This is the law. This has always been the law. Exiled. To the outer territories. I'd heard the stories. Everyone had. They used the outer territories the way you'd use an execution ground, except slower and crueler. It was where you sent people to die when you wanted to keep your hands technically clean. Frozen wastelands stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. No shelter, no food, no water except what you could melt from snow that was older than some of the wolves here. The temperature dropped so low at night that your breath would freeze in your lungs. Rogue wolves prowled the edges, exiles and criminals, and broken things who'd hunt anything weaker than themselves just for something to do, just to feel powerful again. Most people died within 3 days. A week if they were particularly tough or lucky. It was a death sentence, wrapped in legal language and tradition. And everyone standing here knew it. Every single person in this gathering understood that Elder Thorn had just condemned me to die. I looked around desperately, searching the crowd for a single friendly face. Someone who might speak up. Object. Say this was wrong, this was too harsh, this violated something fundamental about who we were supposed to be. But they all looked away. One by one, like a wave moving through the crowd. Even the Omegas I'd shared meals with over the years. The girls I'd laughed with during long nights in the pack house. The ones I'd worked beside in the kitchens and the laundry. The ones I'd confided in about small dreams and smaller hopes. Maya, who I'd helped through her first heat. Sarah, who'd cried on my shoulder when her mother died. Lissa, who I'd taught to read by candlelight. They all turned their backs, until I was standing alone in a circle of hundreds, maybe 1,000 wolves, and the only sound was the crackling of the bonfire and my own ragged breathing. "Move along," the scarred beta said, his voice hard as stone. "You've got until sunrise. That's maybe 4 hours. I suggest you start walking before someone decides Exile is too merciful and we should just handle this the old way." The old way. Execution. I stumbled toward the edge of the gathering, my legs moving on autopilot because my brain had stopped working properly. Everything felt distant, unreal, like this was happening to someone else, and I was just watching from very far away. My heart, what was left of it, beat erratically, skipping and stuttering in my chest like it couldn't remember the right rhythm. Behind me, someone struck up a drum, deep and steady. Then another joined in. Then another. Music started to play, and voices rose in song. One of the traditional gathering songs about unity and strength and the bonds that tied packs together. The gathering continued. They were already celebrating, already moving on. I was already forgotten. I walked into the darkness beyond the firelight, and no one stopped me. No one called out. No one cared. The outer territories stretched before me like an open grave waiting to be filled. No trees to break the wind, no shelter of any kind. Just endless frozen plains dotted with jagged rocks that jutted from the snow like broken bones pushing through skin. The wind cut across the flatlands with nothing to slow it down, nothing to soften it, sharp enough to flay exposed skin within minutes. The snow wasn't fresh and soft like it was in protected areas. It was old, packed down hard by wind and time, crusted over with layers of ice that crunched and cracked under my boots with sounds like breaking glass. I walked because I didn't know what else to do. The pack had given me nothing. No supplies, no food, no water. Not even a blanket or a cloak warmer than the threadbare thing I already wore. Just the clothes on my back and a broken bond that throbbed in my chest like an infected wound that someone kept poking. Within the first hour, I lost all feeling in my fingers. They'd gone white, then red, then a worrying grayish color that probably meant frostbite was setting in. Within 2 hours, my face had gone completely numb. I couldn't feel my nose or my cheeks or my lips. When I tried to lick my lips, my tongue stuck slightly to the frozen skin. By the time the sun started to crawl above the horizon, pale and weak and offering absolutely no warmth, just cold light that made the snow glare painfully bright. I was shaking so violently my teeth clattered together hard enough to hurt. My jaw ached from it. My legs felt like lead weights attached to my hips. Each step was a battle against muscles that didn't want to work anymore. I'd lost one of my boots somewhere in the snow. I didn't remember when. Didn't remember the moment it had come off. My bare foot left bloody prints behind me in the white snow, a trail any predator could follow straight to easy prey. But I couldn't feel the pain anymore. Couldn't feel much of anything except the cold that had seeped so deep it felt like it had replaced my bones. And the bond, always the bond, that constant throbbing ache of something torn and bleeding inside my chest. When I finally collapsed behind a boulder, the first shelter I'd seen in hours, just a large rock that blocked some of the wind, I curled into the smallest ball I could manage and tried to conserve what little warmth remained in my body. This was it. This was how Naira Hale died. Alone in the frozen wasteland, forgotten by everyone who'd ever known her name. Unmourned, unremembered. I closed my eyes and waited for the end. My last thought wasn't of Kael, surprisingly. It was of my mother. I barely remembered her. She'd died when I was 6, Some sickness that swept through the Omega Quarters one brutal winter, taking the weak and the elderly and anyone whose immune system couldn't fight back. But I remembered her hands, rough and work-worn, calloused from years of labor, but so gentle when they brushed hair from my face or checked me for fever. "You're stronger than you know, little one," she'd told me once, when I'd come home crying because the other children had been cruel. "Don't ever let them convince you otherwise. You have your father's strength, even if they can't see it yet." I'd believed her then. I'd been a stupid child who didn't understand how the world worked. The cold wrapped around me like a shroud, pressing down, getting heavier, and I let it take me. I stopped fighting. What was the point? Oh, but I didn't die. When I woke, the sun was high overhead, still pale and distant, still offering no real warmth, but definitely at its zenith. Midday, maybe early afternoon. Hours had passed. Many hours. I should have frozen to death. I should have been a corpse by now, stiff and blue and half buried in drifting snow, waiting for scavengers to find me. But I was still breathing, still alive, still warm. I pushed myself up slowly, expecting my body to scream in protest, expecting frostbite and agony and the kind of damage that doesn't heal, that leaves you crippled even if you somehow survive. Instead, I felt fine. Better than fine. I felt good. Not just warm, comfortably warm, like I'd been sleeping near a fire. My skin, when I pressed my palm to my cheek, was soft and healthy. No ice crystals in my hair, no waxy numbness, no signs of exposure at all. And my foot, the one I'd torn to shreds walking barefoot across frozen rock and ice, it didn't hurt. I pulled back the torn, bloody fabric of my pant leg with shaking hands and stared at what should have been a mangled mess of torn flesh and exposed bone. The cuts were gone, not healed over with scabs and angry red scars, not even freshly closed wounds that were still tender. Gone, like they'd never existed. The skin was smooth and unblemished, healthy pink, not even sensitive when I poked at it. My heart started to pound, and for the first time since Kael had spoken those 3 terrible words, it wasn't from fear or pain. What the hell? I flexed my toes, wiggled my fingers, rolled my shoulders. Everything worked. Everything felt better, stronger, more responsive than it had ever been before. I stood up, and for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake, alert, alive in a way I'd never experienced before, like someone had turned up the volume on my entire existence. My senses sharpened with a clarity that was almost painful. I could hear things I shouldn't be able to hear, the distant cry of a hawk miles away, circling something, the scrape of tiny claws under the snow as some rodent burrowed through frozen earth, the rustle of wind through dead grass I couldn't even see, my own heartbeat, strong and steady, and the rush of blood through my veins. I could smell things with perfect, distinct clarity. My own blood dried on my torn pants, yes, but also the mineral scent of the stone I'd sheltered behind. Something musky and predatory that had passed through here recently. Wolf, but not pack wolf. Rogue. And underneath that, the clean smell of snow and the faint, distant scent of pine from forests I couldn't see. I could see better. The world had more depth, more detail, more sharpness than it had ever had before. I could make out individual snowflakes in the drifts, could see the texture of rock from 30 feet away. This wasn't normal. This wasn't Omega. This wasn't even Alpha. Something was wrong with me. Or maybe, just maybe, something was finally right. Something had changed, was still changing. I could feel it moving under my skin like electricity, like something waking up after a very long sleep. And for the first time since the rejection, since the bond had torn apart inside my chest, I felt something other than pain and despair. I felt angry. Balsam. I survived the first 3 days on nothing but melted snow and sheer stubbornness. I learned fast. Had to. I learned to find shelter in the lee of boulders, in the small spaces where wind had carved out pockets in rock faces. Learned to dig shallow pits in the snow and curl up in them, using my own body heat to create a pocket of warmth that somehow didn't dissipate the way it should have. I learned which plants were safe to eat. Bitter, woody things that grew in the cracks between rocks where the sun hit for a few precious hours each day. They tasted like dirt and misery, but they kept me alive. And I learned that whatever was happening to me, it was getting stronger every day. By the 4th day, I could see in the dark. Not perfectly, not like full daylight, but well enough to navigate without tripping over rocks or walking off cliffs. By the 5th day, I could hear a heartbeat from 50 feet away. Could track prey I couldn't see just by the sound of their breathing. By the 6th day, I ran for 12 miles without stopping, without even getting winded. My muscles didn't burn, my lungs didn't ache, I just ran. My body was changing. I was changing. And on the 7th night, when the rogue wolf came for me, I finally understood what I was becoming. He came out of the darkness like a nightmare given flesh and teeth. A lone alpha, exiled or rogue, it didn't matter which, lean and scarred and feral, with matted fur and eyes that reflected the moonlight like a predator's, empty of anything human. His lips pulled back from yellowed teeth in a snarl, and the growl that rumbled from his chest made the air vibrate. He was bigger than me, stronger, or at least he should have been. An alpha in his prime, even damaged and half-starved. He thought I was easy prey, a lone omega, half-frozen, weak from days of starvation. He thought I'd scream, run, maybe beg. I didn't do any of those things. When he lunged, I moved without thinking, pure instinct. My hand shot out and caught him by the throat mid-leap, my fingers closing around his windpipe like a vice. I used his own momentum against him, redirecting his force and slamming him into the frozen ground so hard the earth cracked beneath him with a sound like breaking ice. He made a wet, choking sound, his eyes going wide with shock. His claws scrabbled at my wrist, tearing through skin and drawing blood, but I didn't let go. Couldn't let go. Something inside me, something dark and hungry and furious, had woken up fully, and it wanted him dead, needed him dead. He'd come here to kill me, and fair was fair. I squeezed. I felt the cartilage in his throat collapse under my fingers like wet paper. Felt the exact moment his spine went limp as the oxygen cut off from his brain. Watched the light fade from his eyes, that initial shock turning to fear, and then to nothing at all. When I finally released him, he crumpled to the ground like a puppet with cut strings and didn't move. Dead. I'd killed him. An alpha. A fully grown, experienced alpha who should have torn me apart. And I'd done it with my bare hands. With one hand, even. I stood there staring at my palms, my small omega hands, now covered in his blood, and my own. And I started to laugh. It wasn't a nice sound. It was brittle and broken and a little bit insane. It was the sound of something inside me shattering completely. Or maybe it was the sound of something being born. I dragged his body behind the rocks and left it for the scavengers that I could hear already circling, drawn by the scent of fresh death. Then I kept walking. Not back toward the packlands. They'd made it abundantly clear I wasn't welcome, that I never had been, not deeper into the outer territories either. That was still suicide, just slower and lonelier. I walked along the border, following the invisible line between civilization and wasteland, between the world that had rejected me and the frozen hell they'd thrown me into, and I started to plan. Because the thing inside me, the power that let me heal, that made me stronger and faster and more than I'd ever been, it wasn't done growing. I could feel it, coiled in my chest where the broken mate bond used to live, where that constant ache had been. It was replacing the bond, filling the empty space with something else, something dangerous. It was hungry, patient, growing stronger every day. And it was waiting for me to decide what to do with it. Kale Draven had rejected me, cast me out, left me to die alone in the cold. He'd called me weak, unworthy, dead weight. He'd made one critical mistake. He'd left me alive. And I was done being weak, done being prey, done accepting what others decided I deserved. The outer territories were brutal, unforgiving. They killed the weak and left the strong scarred. Perfect training ground. So I stayed, and I learned to hunt. 3 weeks in the outer territories, and I'd stopped counting bodies. The first kill had been the hardest, not physically, that had been terrifyingly easy, but mentally. The rogue alpha's face still haunted me sometimes when I closed my eyes. The shock in his expression when he realized an omega had just crushed his throat. The way the light had left his eyes, fading from bright fury to dull nothing in the space of 3 heartbeats. The second kill had been easier. A pair of exiled betas who'd thought cornering me in a narrow ravine was smart strategy. They'd worked together, coordinated their attacks, came at me from 2 sides at once. They'd been wrong about their chances. I'd left them there, broken and cooling in the snow, and felt almost nothing except a distant satisfaction that I was still breathing and they weren't. By the fifth kill, I'd stopped feeling anything at all. The outer territories taught you fast or killed you faster. There was no middle ground, no room for hesitation or mercy or second thoughts. You adapted or you died, and I'd decided very early that I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not until I'd made certain people understand exactly what they'd thrown away. I'd found a cave system about 15 miles from where I'd first collapsed that terrible night, deep enough to provide real shelter from the wind that could strip flesh from bone, high enough on a rocky outcropping that most predators wouldn't bother with the climb. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through, which made it easy to defend. Inside, the main chamber opened up to about 12 feet across, and the stone walls held just enough residual warmth from the day to keep the worst of the cold at bay during the long nights. It wasn't home. Would never be home. But it was mine. My territory. My space. And I'd killed 3 wolves who'd thought otherwise. I crouched near the mouth of the cave now, watching the sun set over the frozen plains that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky bled orange and red and purple, colors so vivid they looked painted on, artificial and too beautiful for a place this brutal. The old-timers said those colors meant the temperature was about to drop another 20 degrees, that the clearer and more beautiful the sunset, the colder the night would be. I believed them. My hand moved automatically, scraping a piece of bone I'd scavenged from one of my kills against a rough stone, sharpening it into something that could puncture vital organs. The repetitive motion helped me think, helped me plan, kept my hands busy while my mind worked through problems that had no easy answers, because staying alive wasn't enough anymore. Survival was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. I wanted more. I wanted revenge. Wanted to see Kael Draven's face when he realized that the Omega he'd discarded like garbage had become something he should have feared. Wanted to watch his certainty crumble. Wanted to hear him admit he'd made a mistake. The thought should have scared me. The old Naira, the one who'd existed 3 weeks in a lifetime ago, would have been horrified at the violence brewing in my chest. She'd believed in pact law and hierarchy, in knowing your place and being grateful for whatever scraps of kindness came your way. She'd believed that Omegas were meant to serve, to submit, to accept their fate with quiet dignity. That Naira was dead. She'd frozen to death in the snow the night Kael Draven ripped out her heart in front of 1,000 witnesses, and didn't even have the decency to look sorry about it. What had crawled out of that frozen grave was something else entirely. Something harder, angrier, more dangerous. Something that didn't believe in fate or dignity or any of the pretty lies they told Omegas to keep them compliant. You planning to stare at that sunset all night, or are you going to answer my question? The voice came from behind me, deeper in the cave, and I was on my feet with the bone blade at throat level before my brain caught up to my body. My muscles had moved on pure instinct, pure training, the kind that Terra had been drilling into me for the past 2 weeks. The woman standing at the back of my cave, she had no right to be in my cave, raised her hand slowly, a wry smile twisting her scarred face. The scar ran from her left temple down across her cheek to her jaw, pale against darker skin. Old injury, something with claws. Easy, ghost, she said, her voice calm despite the blade hovering 3 inches from her throat. Just me. Terra. I lowered the blade but didn't sheath it, didn't relax my stance. How many times do I have to tell you not to sneak up on me? How many times do I have to tell you that if I wanted you dead, you'd be dead already? She moved past me to the cave entrance, her movements easy and fluid despite the limp she tried to hide. Old injury there, too. Something had shattered her left knee badly enough that it had never healed quite right. Besides, you heard me coming. I could tell by the way your shoulders tensed about 30 seconds ago. She was right. I had heard her. The slight scrape of boot on stone, the change in air pressure as someone moved through the narrow entrance tunnel. My hearing had gotten sharp enough over the past weeks that almost nothing surprised me anymore. Almost. Terra was the first exile I'd met who hadn't immediately tried to kill me. She'd found me 2 weeks ago, bleeding from a fight with 3 rogues who'd gotten lucky with a knife. One of them had managed to slash my side open before I'd torn his arm off, literally torn it off at the shoulder. The other 2 had run. Smart choice. I'd won that fight, but barely. Was losing blood fast enough that even my enhanced healing was struggling to keep up. She'd watched from the rocks above until the fight was over and the rogues were dead or fled, then climbed down with the casual grace of someone who'd spent years navigating terrain that killed normal wolves. She'd offered me a strip of dried meat like it was the most normal thing in the world to find a blood-soaked omega sitting among corpses. "You fight like shit," she'd said, her voice matter-of-fact. "All raw power, no technique. You're relying on strength and speed to overwhelm your opponents before they can hurt you. Works fine against untrained rogues and desperate exiles. Going to get you killed the first time you face someone who actually knows what they're doing." Then she'd tilted her head, studying me with those sharp, calculating eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "But you're fast, faster than you should be, stronger too. And that healing?" She'd gestured at my side where the wound was already closing, flesh knitting back together in real time. "That's not normal, not even for an alpha. So yeah, you fight like shit, but you've got potential. I can work with potential." She'd been teaching me ever since. How to fight properly. Not just rely on the raw strength that was still growing inside me like something alive. How to use leverage and momentum. How to find weak points in an opponent's guard. How to track by scent and sound and the tiny disturbances animals made in their environment. How to kill efficiently without wasting energy or exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. How to survive out here where survival was the only thing that mattered, and everything else was luxury you couldn't afford. "What do you want, Terra?" I asked now, settling back into my crouch and returning to sharpening my bone blade. She leaned against the cave wall, pulling out her own piece of dried meat, rabbit, from the smell, and tearing off a chunk with her teeth. She chewed slowly, watching me. "Heard something interesting from a scout who passed through yesterday. Thought you might want to know." My pulse quickened despite my attempt to stay calm and neutral. "What kind of something?" "The packs are talking about you. Well, not you specifically. They don't know who you are, don't know your name or where you came from, but they're talking about the ghost wolf." I'd heard the name before. Whispered by rogues in the seconds before I killed them. Muttered by scouts who'd gotten too close to my territory and run when they'd scented something that didn't match their expectations. Spoken in fear by travelers who'd found the bodies I'd left behind. The ghost wolf. The phantom that haunted the borderlands. The thing that killed alphas and vanished into the snow like it had never existed. The monster that couldn't possibly be real because omegas didn't do things like that. "Let them talk," I said, scraping bone against stone. "Words don't scare me. They're doing more than talking." Terra's expression went serious, the amusement draining from her face. "They're organizing hunting parties, multiple packs working together, which almost never happens. And Kael Draven himself put out a bounty, 20 gold pieces for whoever brings in the ghost wolf's head. Dead or alive, though I'm guessing he's hoping for dead. Easier that way." My hands tightened around the bone blade until my knuckles went white and the edges cut into my palms. Kael. Everything came back to Kael. Always. "How big are these hunting parties?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Big enough to be a real problem. 5, 6 wolves each, sometimes more. Experienced trackers, not the desperate rogues and exiles you've been fighting. Warriors with training and discipline and gear. They're coordinating their search patterns, covering territory systematically." She paused, studying my reaction. "You've been lucky so far. The ones you've killed have been weak. Exiles, rogues, broken things looking for an easy target to make themselves feel powerful again. But these? These are different. These are pack wolves with training and resources and a direct financial incentive to want you dead." "Good," I said quietly. Terra's eyebrow rose. "Good? Did the cold freeze your brain? Were you not listening to the part about organized hunting parties specifically looking for you?" "I'm tired of hiding, tired of running, tired of killing desperate rogues who aren't even worth the effort." I met her eyes. "If they want to find me, let them find me. I'll kill them just like I killed the others. Maybe easier since they'll come right to me instead of making me hunt them down." "You're insane." "Probably. Definitely." She shook her head, but there was something almost like respect in her expression. "You know what they'll do when the hunting parties don't come back, right? When warriors start disappearing into the territories and nobody returns? They'll escalate. Send more. Better equipped. More dangerous. Let them." Terra was quiet for a long moment, chewing her meat and watching me with those sharp eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. Finally, she sighed. "There's something else you should know. The hunting parties aren't the only things moving in the territories. There's been activity along the southern border, Shadow Peak Pack. I frowned. They're miles from here, different territory entirely. They're moving north, pushing into the borderlands between their territory and Ironclaw's. Word is, they're planning something, some kind of challenge to Ironclaw's dominance. Alpha Marcus has been making noise about how Kael's gotten too comfortable, too arrogant, how the northern territories need new leadership. She paused, letting that sink in. Kael's been busy fortifying his borders, pulling warriors back from outlying areas to defend the core territory, which means the border patrols are thinner than usual, fewer eyes watching the approaches to Pack lands, fewer wolves standing between the outer territories and the Pack house itself. My heart started beating faster, harder. Why are you telling me this? Because I know that look in your eyes. I've seen it before. She gestured at her own face. In my own reflection, back before the territories broke something inside me that won't ever be fixed. You want revenge. You want to make him hurt the way he hurt you. You want to stand in front of him and show him exactly what his rejection created. She wasn't asking, she was stating facts. And right now, she continued, while he's distracted with Shadow Peak, while his attention is divided and his forces are spread thin, might be your only chance to get close, to actually reach him instead of just killing his scouts and hoping word gets back. You're suggesting I go back. I'm not suggesting anything. I don't do suggestions. Terra stood, brushing dust and dried meat crumbs from her pants. I'm giving you information, strategic intelligence. What you do with it is entirely your business. But if you're planning something stupid, and you are, I can see it written all over your face, at least be smart about it. Don't just charge in like a rabid animal with nothing but rage to guide you. Plan it, think it through, make it count. She was halfway to the cave entrance when I called out, Terra, why are you helping me? She stopped but didn't turn around. Her shoulders were tense, her spine rigid.
Because
5 years ago, I was exactly where you are. Rejected by my fated mate. Broken. Humiliated in front of everyone I'd ever known. Left to die in these same frozen wastes. Her voice went quiet, almost too quiet to hear. And nobody helped me. Nobody taught me. Nobody gave a single shit whether I lived or died. I had to figure it all out alone, and it almost killed me a dozen times over. More than a dozen. Now she did turn, and her expression was hard as stone, but there was something raw underneath it. Something that still hurt after 5 years. You remind me of who I used to be. Before the territories broke me. Before I became this. She gestured at herself, at the scars and the limp and the hardness that went bone deep. Maybe if I help you, you won't end up like me. Maybe you'll be better, stronger. Maybe you'll actually get your revenge instead of just surviving long enough to become another cautionary tale. She left before I could respond, squeezing through the narrow cave entrance and disappearing into the gathering darkness. I stood there for a long time, turning her words over in my mind like stones I was examining for flaws. Kael was distracted. The borders were weak. Warriors were being pulled away to defend against Shadow Peak. I could get close to Packlands, maybe even get inside. And then what? Kill him. Walk into Ironclaw territory, into the heart of his power, and try to kill an alpha warlord in front of his entire pack? I was stronger than I'd been, faster, more dangerous than any Omega had a right to be. But I wasn't invincible. I wasn't immune to blades or claws or the sheer overwhelming force of hundreds of trained warriors who'd tear me apart if I threatened their alpha. One Omega against an entire pack was suicide, no matter how powerful I'd become. But maybe I didn't need to kill him. Maybe I just needed to make him see me. Really see me. See what he'd thrown away. See what his rejection had created. See that the Omega he'd called weak and worthless had become something that made his warriors fear the dark. The idea took root and grew, spreading through my mind like winter frost across a window. I didn't need to kill him. I needed to break him. Break his certainty, his confidence, his absolute conviction that he'd made the right choice. I needed to prove that rejecting me was the biggest mistake of his life, and I needed to do it publicly. Humiliate him the way he'd humiliated me. Make him feel small and worthless and disposable. Make him understand what he'd done. The planning took me the rest of the night. 4 days later, I stood at the edge of Ironclaw territory for the first time since my exile. The border was marked by stone cairns placed every 100 yards, ancient markers that predated the current packs, probably placed by wolves who'd been dead for centuries, back when the territories were first being divided and claimed. Beyond them, the land changed subtly, but noticeably. The snow wasn't as deep. There were trees here, tall evergreens that provided shelter from the wind and made the air smell like pine and earth instead of just ice and death. Home. The word rose unbidden in my mind, and I crushed it immediately. This wasn't home. Home didn't exile you to die. Home didn't stand by and watch while you were humiliated and broken. Home didn't turn its back when you needed it most. This was enemy territory. And I was here to hurt them. I'd wrapped myself in furs I'd taken from my kills, thick pelts layered and stitched together with strips of sinew, dark enough to blend with shadows. They hid my scent under layers of animal musk and made my frame look bulkier, more threatening. In the dark, I looked like any other rogue or exile. Nothing special. Nothing worth paying particular attention to. Just another broken wolf trying to survive in the margins. Terra had been right about the patrols. I'd been watching for 3 hours, crouched motionless in the snow, and had only seen 2 pairs of guards pass by. They'd been talking loud enough that I'd heard them from a quarter-mile away, complaining about the cold, about being pulled from comfortable posts to watch the empty borderlands, about how this whole thing with Shadow Peak was probably going to turn into a real war and they'd all end up dead. Sloppy, distracted, overconfident. Kael's warriors were good, well-trained, disciplined, experienced, but they weren't expecting a real threat from the outer territories. Nobody survived out there long enough to become a genuine problem. The rogues and exiles were disorganized, broken, more likely to kill each other than pose any threat to an organized pack. Nobody except me. I waited until the second patrol had passed and their voices had faded completely into the distance. Then I moved, fast and silent, keeping to the shadows between the trees, using every bit of training Terra had drilled into me over the past 2 weeks. My enhanced senses tracked everything. The rustle of small animals in the underbrush that told me which paths were clear, the distant sound of the pack house settlement maybe 2 miles northeast, the complex layering of scent markers that told me where patrol routes overlapped and where the gaps were. I wasn't heading for the pack house. Not yet. That would be suicide, even with the patrols thinned out. I was heading for the eastern training grounds, a large clearing about a mile inside the border where warriors practice combat and young wolves learn to fight. Terra had told me about it, had described the layout from memory. During the day, it would be full of activity, dozens of wolves sparring and drilling and running exercises. But at night, it was usually empty, just another clearing in the forest. Usually, but not tonight. I crouched in the tree line, hidden behind a massive pine trunk, watching the scene unfold in the clearing ahead. A dozen warriors stood in a loose circle, torches planted in the ground around them casting flickering orange light and creating deep pools of shadow. In the center of the circle, 2 wolves circled each other warily, both in human form, both armed with practice blades made of wood weighted to approximate real weapons. One of them was the scarred beta who'd shoved me at the gathering, who'd grabbed my arm and told me I was embarrassing myself, who'd laughed while I'd broken apart in front of everyone. I recognized the sneer, the way he moved with casual cruelty, like hurting people was just another part of his day. The other was younger, maybe 17 or 18, lean and quick but clearly outmatched. His stance was good, his grip on the practice blade competent, but he was fighting someone with 10 years more experience and 30 pounds more muscle. "Come on, Finn," one of the watching warriors called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Show us what you've got. Make your father proud." The young wolf, Finn, lunged forward, his blade flashing in the torchlight as he aimed for the beta's midsection. The beta sidestepped easily, almost lazily, and brought his own blade around in a vicious arc that caught Finn across the ribs hard enough to make him cry out and stumble sideways. "Pathetic," the beta spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You fight like an omega, like you're afraid to hurt someone, like you think this is a game with rules and consequences." Finn straightened slowly, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his ribs where the practice blade had hit hard enough to break skin through his shirt. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Again," he said through gritted teeth. "Again? You can barely stand, boy. Look at you. You're bleeding." "I said again." The beta's face darkened. "Fine. Your funeral." He attacked fast this time, no more playing around. A flurry of strikes, high-low, left, right, that Finn tried desperately to block. But he was tired, hurt, slower than he needed to be. The beta's blade got through his guard and slammed into his shoulder, then his knee, then across his face hard enough to snap his head sideways. Finn went down hard, hitting the frozen ground with an impact I felt through the soles of my boots. Blood poured from his nose. His lip was split. He was gasping for air. "Stay down," the beta advised, standing over him. "Before I really hurt you. Before this stops being training and starts being punishment." But Finn was already trying to get up, his hands scrabbling for purchase on the icy ground, his face a mask of determination and blood and something that might have been shame. The beta's expression went cold. I said, "Stay down." He kicked Finn in the ribs hard enough that I heard something crack from 50 feet away. The sharp snap of bone breaking. Finn's scream cut through the night. The watching warriors didn't intervene. Some of them looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and glancing at each other. But none of them moved. None of them spoke up. This was pack justice. Pack hierarchy. The strong dominated the weak. The experienced taught the inexperienced through pain and humiliation. That was the way it had always been done. That was tradition, and traditions were sacred. I should have left. This wasn't my problem. This wasn't my fight. Finn wasn't my responsibility. I didn't even know him, had never seen him before this moment. I'd come here to scout, to observe, to gather intelligence, to figure out how to hurt Kyle where it would matter most. Not to intervene in pack business that had nothing to do with me. I should have turned around and disappeared back into the outer territories before anyone noticed I'd been here. But watching the beta pull back his boot for another kick while Finn lay there bleeding and broken and trying not to cry, watching the other warriors stand by and do absolutely nothing, just like they'd done nothing while I'd been torn apart at the gathering, something inside me snapped. Something that had been holding itself together through sheer force of will finally broke apart. I was moving before I'd made a conscious decision. Out of the trees. Across the clearing. Moving fast enough that nobody registered my presence until I was already there, already inside their circle. My hand closed around the beta's ankle mid-kick, stopping his momentum like he'd hit a stone wall. He looked down in shock, his brain struggling to process what was happening. "What the—" I yanked hard, pulling his leg out from under him with enough force to lift him completely off the ground for a heartbeat. He crashed to the frozen earth on his back, the impact driving all the air from his lungs in a whoosh. The clearing exploded into chaos, warriors grabbing for weapons, shouts of alarm and confusion, someone yelling for the watch, for reinforcements, for someone to sound the alarm. But I was already moving. I planted my foot on the beta's chest, right over his sternum, and applied just enough pressure to crack a rib. He gasped in pain, his hands coming up to grab at my ankle. I met his shocked eyes and watched recognition dawn. "Remember me?" I asked quietly. His face went pale, then gray. "You, the rejected Omega, the one Kyle, you're supposed to be dead?" I pressed down harder, cracking another rib. The sound was satisfying. So was his scream. "Yeah, I got that impression. Funny how things work out." "The ghost wolf," one of the other warriors breathed, his voice tight with something that might have been awe or fear or both. "It's the ghost wolf." I glanced up at the circle of warriors surrounding me. 12 of them, all armed, all bigger and theoretically stronger than a normal Omega had any right to challenge. But I wasn't normal anymore, and I was so far beyond being afraid that I couldn't even remember what fear felt like. "Any of you want to try your luck?" I asked, my voice carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen over the clearing. "I'm right here. Come collect your bounty. 20 gold pieces, isn't it? That's good money. Enough to live comfortably for a year." Nobody moved. They should have rushed me. Should have attacked all at once, used their numbers to overwhelm me before I could react. But something in my stance, in my voice, in the casual way I stood over their fallen comrade without an ounce of visible fear or hesitation, it made them pause, made them think twice, made them afraid. "She's alone," one of them finally said, trying to inject confidence into his voice and failing. "Just one Omega, just one wolf. We outnumber her 12 to 1. We can—" "She's not just an Omega," another interrupted, his voice tight. "Look at her eyes." I didn't know what they were seeing, didn't know what my eyes looked like anymore. Hadn't seen my own reflection since before the gathering. but I knew what I felt burning in my chest where the mate bond used to live. Power. Raw and hungry and barely contained, growing stronger every day. Something that wanted out, that wanted to show these wolves exactly what happened when you threw away something precious. Last chance, I said, my voice calm. Walk away. Tell Kyle you saw the ghost wolf and live to tell the tale. Or stay and find out why even alphas run when they catch my scent. 3 of them actually backed up a step. The rest stood their ground, but their hands shook on their weapons. Their eyes darted to each other, silently asking who was going to make the first move. You can't just attack pack warriors and expect to walk away, one of them said, trying to sound authoritative and failing completely. His voice cracked on the last word. Alpha Kale will hunt you down. We'll make an example of you. Alpha Kale, I cut him off, putting enough ice in my voice to freeze bone, rejected his fated mate and left her to die in the frozen waste. You really think I'm worried about what Alpha Kale will do? You think I'm scared of the wolf who tried to kill me and failed? I stepped off the beta's chest and moved toward Finn, who was still on the ground, watching me with wide eyes that had gone glassy with shock and pain. Can you walk? I asked him, my voice gentler. He nodded shakily, not trusting his voice. Then get up and get out of here. Go find a healer. Get those ribs looked at before they puncture something vital. I offered him my hand. This isn't your fight anymore. He stared at my hand like it might bite him, then slowly reached up and took it. I pulled him to his feet, steadying him when he swayed dangerously. He was lighter than he looked, all lean muscle and not much else. I don't understand, he stammered, his voice thick from the blood still pouring from his nose. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. And if they find out I let you, if my father finds out, your father can take it up with me directly if he has a problem. I pushed him gently toward the edge of the clearing. Now go, before I change my mind and decide you're not worth the trouble. He stumbled toward the tree line, and the watching warriors parted to let him pass. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody even looked at him. All eyes were on me. I turned back to face them, letting them see my face clearly in the torchlight, letting them memorize it. Remember it. Tell Kale I'm coming, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the clearing. Tell him the Omega he threw away like garbage is alive. Tell him I'm stronger than any wolf in his pack. Tell him I've killed alphas who thought they could hunt me, and I didn't even break a sweat doing it. I started walking toward the tree line, slow and deliberate, daring them to try something. And tell him, I continued, not looking back, that when I'm ready, when I've decided the time is right, I'm going to take everything he values and burn it to ash, his power, his reputation, his certainty that he's untouchable. You're insane, the beta gasped from the ground, still clutching his broken ribs. You're just one wolf, one Omega with delusions of grandeur. He'll crush you like an insect, will make you beg for the death you should have had in the territories. I paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back over my shoulder. I smiled, and I knew from the way they flinched that it wasn't a nice smile. He can try. Then I ran. Back across the clearing, into the trees, moving so fast the warriors barely had time to react. Behind me, the clearing erupted in shouting. Someone screamed for reinforcements. I heard the sound of pursuit starting, boots pounding on frozen ground, branches breaking, orders being barked in voices tight with panic. But they were too slow, too clumsy, too scared to really commit to the chase. I was already gone, melting into the darkness between the trees like I'd never been there at all. Like a ghost. I didn't stop running until I was miles into the outer territories, well past the border cairns and deep into the frozen waste where pack wolves feared to follow even in daylight. Only then did I slow, my breath coming easy despite the distance I'd covered at full sprint. My heart pounded, but not from exertion. From exhilaration, from the pure intoxicating rush of what I'd just done. I just walked into Ironclaw territory, challenged their warriors on their own ground, humiliated one of their betas in front of his peers, issued a direct threat to their alpha, and walked away alive. Untouched. Victorious. Terra was going to absolutely kill me. The thought made me laugh, high and bright and maybe a little unhinged. I found her at our agreed meeting point, a cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter about 3 miles from my cave, far enough from the border that we wouldn't be easily found, but close enough to retreat to quickly if necessary. She was pacing when I arrived, which was never a good sign. Terra didn't pace. Terra was calm and controlled and never showed stress. Do you have any idea? She started the moment she saw me emerge from the darkness, then stopped dead. Her eyes narrowed. What did you do? Might have caused a small incident. Define small. I might have attacked some Ironclaw warriors in their own territory, on their training grounds, and I might have threatened Kael directly, in front of witnesses who will definitely report back to him. Terra stared at me for a long moment, her expression completely unreadable. Then she started laughing. Not the nice kind of laughter, not the kind that said she was amused or pleased, the kind that said you were watching someone drive full speed off a cliff and there was absolutely nothing you could do to stop them, and you'd given up trying. You're dead, she finally managed, wiping tears from her eyes. You know that, right? You're absolutely, completely, utterly dead. There's no coming back from this. He's going to send an entire army after you. Let him. Let him? She grabbed my shoulders, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You don't understand what you've done. You've made this personal now. Before, you were just a problem to solve. An anomaly. An annoying ghost story that was killing rogues and making his borders look unsafe. Now you've challenged his authority in front of his own warriors. You've humiliated one of his betas. You've threatened him directly. She shook me, hard. He can't let that stand. He won't let that stand. Not if he wants to maintain any credibility as an alpha. You've backed him into a corner where he has to respond with overwhelming force or look weak. Good, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I want him to come. I want him to send his warriors. I want him to see me with his own eyes and understand that rejecting me was the biggest mistake of his life. Terra released me and stepped back, shaking her head slowly. You're not looking for revenge. You're looking for suicide with extra steps and a side of pointless violence. Maybe. Or maybe I'm looking to prove a point that needs proving. What point could possibly be worth dying for? That Omegas aren't weak. That we're not disposable. That we're not things to be thrown away when we're inconvenient or don't fit into someone's plans. My voice rose, echoing off the rocks. That I'm not weak. That I never was. That the only thing wrong with me was believing what they told me about myself. Terra was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the starlight. You saved that young wolf. Finn, why? I thought about it, really thought about it. Because nobody saved me when I needed it, I finally said. Because I know what it feels like to be on the ground while someone hurts you and everyone else just watches. Because he reminded me of who I used to be and I couldn't just walk away. That's not a good enough reason to risk everything you've built. It is for me. She sighed, long and weary, the sound of someone who'd had this argument before and knew how it would end. You know what's coming, right? He won't send a dozen warriors next time. He'll send 50, 100, every able-bodied fighter in his pack if that's what it takes. He'll hunt you down like the animal he thinks you are, and he won't stop until you're dead or you've left his territory forever. I'm not leaving. Then you're going to die. We'll see. Terra studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something like resignation settling over her features. Yeah, I guess we will. She turned to leave, then paused at the edge of the rocks. For what it's worth. She looked back over her shoulder. I hope you make him bleed. I hope you take everything from him and leave him with nothing but regrets. I hope you become the cautionary tale alphas tell their children about what happens when you throw away something precious. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness with the ease of someone who'd spent years becoming a ghost herself. I stood there alone, looking up at the sky, at the stars scattered like ice chips across black velvet, cold and distant and uncaring. Somewhere out there, maybe 2 miles away, maybe less, Kael was hearing about what I'd done, about the Omega who'd challenged his warriors and threatened him directly, about the ghost wolf who'd walked into his territory and walked back out unscathed. He'd be angry, furious probably. His pride would be wounded, his authority questioned. He'd send hunters, trackers, warriors with orders to bring back my head on a pike. Good. Perfect. Let them come. I'd been hiding long enough, been running and surviving and killing in the shadows. It was time to step into the light. The power in my chest pulsed like a second heartbeat, hungry and eager and ready. 3 weeks ago, I'd been ready to die in the snow, broken and alone. Now? Now I was ready to fight, And if Kael Draven wanted to see what his rejected mate had become, I was more than happy to show him. The hunt was on, but this time I wasn't the prey. They came for me 3 days later. Not the hunting parties I'd expected, small, coordinated groups of 5 or 6 warriors moving carefully through the territories, tracking and observing before committing to engagement. Not scouts or trackers trying to pinpoint my exact location before calling in reinforcements. Kael sent 40 warriors. 40. The number hit me like a physical blow when I counted them from my vantage point on the high rocks above my cave. I'd been watching the eastern approach since before sunrise, restless and unable to sleep. Some instinct warning me that today was the day everything would change. They moved in formation across the frozen plains as the sun rose, turning the landscape into a field of blinding white that hurt to look at directly. Disciplined. Organized. Spreading out to cover more ground while maintaining perfect visual contact with each other. No stragglers. No weak points in their formation that I could immediately identify. Professional soldiers, not the overconfident betas or desperate rogues I'd been killing for the past 3 weeks. These were Kael's best warriors, and they were here to end me. "You should run." Terra's voice came from behind me, closer than I'd realized. She'd arrived sometime in the night, silent as always, moving through the dark like she was part of it. She stood now with her arms crossed, watching the approaching force with the same grim expression she wore when she talked about her own rejection, her own exile, her own transformation into something harder and colder than what she'd started as. "Where would I run to?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the advancing warriors. They were maybe half a mile away now, close enough that I could make out individual faces, see the weapons strapped to their backs. Real steel, not practice blades. They'll just follow. Track me down eventually, no matter how far I go. Better to face them here, where I know the terrain, where I have the advantage of high ground and familiarity. 40 to 1 aren't odds you can beat, no matter how strong you've gotten. Terra moved up beside me, her weathered face hard as the stone we stood on. "You're fast, you're powerful. You heal like nothing I've ever seen. But you're not invincible. You're not immortal. They'll wear you down through sheer attrition, surround you, cut off your escape routes one by one until you've got nowhere left to go." She paused, her jaw tight. "This isn't bravery. It's suicide with a more dramatic backdrop. Maybe I'm tired of running." "Then you're a fool." "Probably." We stood in silence for a long moment, watching the warriors fan out across the frozen plain. They were organized into smaller units of 5, each unit maintaining formation, while the whole moved together like a single organism. Military precision. These weren't pack warriors playing at soldier. These were actual soldiers with real training and real experience. Kael had taken my threat seriously. The realization sent a thrill of dark satisfaction through my chest. "There's something wrong with their formation," Terra said suddenly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the approaching force with the tactical mind of someone who'd survived 5 years in the territories. "See how they're weighted heavily to the west? And that gap on the eastern flank, like they're leaving it deliberately weak?" I looked where she was pointing, and she was right. The formation was subtly off balance, creating what looked like an obvious weakness. The eastern side had only 2 units, 10 warriors, compared to the western side's 4 units. "It's a trap," I said, the pieces clicking together, obviously. "Question is, what kind of trap?" Terra tilted her head, still studying the formation with intense focus. "Either they're trying to funnel you into a kill zone they've prepared, somewhere with multiple layers of attackers waiting in ambush, or what? Or they want you to run east. Want you to think you've spotted a weakness in their formation and found an escape route." Her expression darkened, lips pressing into a thin line. "Which means there's something waiting out there. Something worse than 40 well-trained warriors." My stomach dropped, even though part of me had been expecting this. Kael would make tactical sense. Let his warriors flush you out, pressure you, drive you toward what looks like safety. And when you think you're escaping, he's waiting. Terra's voice was flat, factual. He gets to be the one who kills you personally, proves he's still the strongest alpha in the territories, still in control, makes an example of the Omega who dared challenge him and restores his authority in front of witnesses. The power in my chest surged, hot and eager and hungry. The thought of facing Kael directly, of making him look at what he'd created when he threw me away, it called to something deep and primal inside me. something that wanted confrontation more than it wanted survival. Good, I heard myself say. Good? Are you listening to yourself right now? You sound completely insane. Terra grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise even through the furs I wore. You go out there, you're playing exactly into his hands. He's had 3 full days to plan this, to prepare, to stack every possible advantage in his favor. He knows this territory. He knows his warriors' capabilities. He's probably scouted the terrain, identified choke points, prepared backup plans. She shook me, hard. And you're going to walk right into it because you're too angry to think straight, too focused on revenge to see the obvious trap. She wasn't wrong. The logical part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive through 3 weeks of brutal survival, knew she was absolutely right. Charging into an obvious trap was the stupidest possible move. It was what Kyle was counting on, what his entire strategy depended on. But the rest of me, the part that had been broken and discarded and left to freeze to death, the part that had crawled out of that frozen grave, transformed into something new and angry and hungry for justice, didn't care about logic. It didn't care about tactics or strategy or survival. It wanted blood. It wanted Kyle to understand what he'd done, what he'd created, what he'd lost. I'm going, I said quietly, meeting Terra's eyes. She stared at me for a long moment, something complicated moving across her scarred face. Then she released my arm and stepped back, shaking her head slowly. Then you're on your own. I don't do suicide missions. Did that once, and it cost me everything I had left to lose. She started to turn away, then paused, looked back over her shoulder. For what it's worth, you would have been something really special if you'd lived long enough to figure out what you actually are. What I really am? Something the packs haven't seen in generations, maybe centuries. She met my eyes, and there was something almost like sadness in hers. But we'll never know now, will we? Because you're going to throw it all away for a chance to hurt the man who hurt you. He deserves it. Maybe. Probably. She shrugged. But that doesn't mean you have to die giving it to him. Then she was gone, disappearing into the rocks with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent 5 years becoming a ghost. I stood alone, looking down at the advancing warriors, then east toward where Kyle was supposedly waiting. 40 warriors and an alpha warlord who wanted me dead. Against one Omega with 3 weeks of survival training and power she barely understood and definitely couldn't fully control. The old Naira, the one who'd existed a month ago, would have been paralyzed with terror. The new one smiled, sharp and cold. Let them come. I hit the eastern flank like a storm breaking against cliffs. The 2 warriors stationed there barely had time to register my presence before I was on them, moving faster than their training had prepared them for. I came in low and fast, using a technique Terra had drilled into me until my muscles remembered it, even when my brain was screaming, go for the knees first, take away their mobility and their ability to fight standing, then finish them while they're down and vulnerable. The first one went down with his kneecap shattered, my bone blade driven through the joint with surgical precision. His scream cut through the morning air, high and raw. The second warrior managed to get his blade up, managed to achieve a defensive posture, but I was already inside his guard, too close for his longer weapon to be effective. My hand closed around his throat, and I squeezed while simultaneously twisting. The crack of vertebrae breaking was audible even over his partner's continued screaming. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. 2 down in less than 5 seconds. The rest of the formation reacted immediately, converging on my position with military precision that would have been impressive if it wasn't being used to kill me. But I was already moving, already using the terrain to my advantage, rocks and ice and the natural unevenness of the frozen ground that I'd memorized over 3 weeks of living here. They had numbers, superior training, perfect coordination. I had speed and the desperate fury of someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. A female warrior came at me from the left, her blade aimed for my ribs in a strike that would have punched through lung if it connected. I caught her wrist mid-thrust, used her own momentum against her to flip her over my shoulder, and slammed her into the frozen ground hard enough that her head bounced off the ice with a sickening crack. She went limp. Unconscious or dead. I didn't stay to check. 3 more warriors surrounded me in a triangle formation, working together with the kind of coordination that spoke to years of training together. Trying to box me in, limit my mobility, force me to fight on their terms. I went up instead of back, leaping onto a boulder that put me above their immediate reach. One of them tried to follow, scrambling up the rock face after me with admirable determination. I kicked him in the face on his way up, felt his nose shatter under my boot heel, sent him tumbling back into his companions in a tangle of limbs and weapons. "She's heading east!" someone shouted, voice tight with stress. "Drive her east! Force her toward the trap!" They wanted me to run in that direction, wanted me to think I was escaping their formation while actually running straight toward whatever Kyle had prepared for me. So I ran west instead, straight toward the densest part of their formation, where the warriors were packed closest together. The shock on their faces was almost worth the absolute insanity of the move. I hit them like a battering ram, like a force of nature, targeting the biggest warrior I could see. A massive alpha, who had to be 6.5 feet tall and 300 pounds of solid muscle. He was positioned at the center of the western formation, clearly the anchor point, the one the other warriors were keying off of for their positioning. Take him down, and the formation would collapse into chaos. He saw me coming, had enough time to process what was happening and bring his blade around in a devastating arc that would have cut me clean in half if it had connected. I dropped and slid under the swing, my momentum on the ice carrying me between his legs. As I passed beneath him, I reached up and raked my claws across the back of both his knees, severing tendons and ligaments. He went down like a felled tree, his howl of pain and rage echoing off the rocks. The formation shattered into chaos. Warriors broke off to help their fallen leader, their training warring with their instinct to protect a packmate. Others tried to reposition to contain me, to reestablish some kind of tactical advantage. Still others were just confused, unsure what was happening or what their orders were now that the plan had gone completely wrong. For maybe 10 precious seconds, it was pure chaos instead of military coordination. I used those seconds to run. Not east toward Kyle's trap. Not west toward more warriors. North. Toward higher ground where the rocks would provide cover and the steep terrain would slow down anyone trying to follow. Behind me, someone was screaming orders, trying to restore order and discipline to the scattered formation. But I was already gone, climbing fast up the rock face, using handholds that would have been impossible for me 4 weeks ago. My enhanced strength made the climb almost easy, muscles that used to struggle with basic tasks now propelling me upward with frightening efficiency. I reached a narrow ledge about 60 feet up and paused to look back, catching my breath. The warriors were regrouping below, but slowly. I'd hurt them badly. 5 down for sure, maybe 6. The big alpha was still on the ground being tended to by 3 others. They'd managed to stop the bleeding, but he clearly wasn't getting up anytime soon. They'd be more cautious now, more careful, less willing to underestimate what I could do, which meant slower. Perfect. I kept climbing, heading for the summit where I knew Kyle would be waiting. The ambush came from above, and I walked right into it like an amateur. I'd been so focused on the warriors below, on monitoring their progress and making sure they weren't finding a faster route up, that I'd completely missed the 3 wolves waiting on the cliff face above me. They dropped down simultaneously in a perfectly coordinated attack, landing in a triangle formation that cut off every escape route I had. Professional, precise, clearly planned well in advance. These weren't ordinary warriors. These were elite. The leader, a female beta with a long scar running down her left arm and cold, calculating eyes, smiled without any warmth. "End of the line, Ghost Wolf." "You think 3 is enough?" I asked, settling into a fighting stance Terra had taught me, weight-balanced, ready to move in any direction. 3 of us? Against 1 Omega? Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. "More than enough. You've been lucky so far, killing desperate rogues and overconfident idiots. But we're different. We're the ones Kyle sends when he needs something done right." They attacked in perfect synchronization, blades flashing in the morning sun. No wasted movement, no unnecessary flourishes, just clean, efficient strikes designed to kill. These weren't the sloppy, arrogant warriors from the training grounds. These were killers. I barely blocked the first strike, my bone blade meeting steel with a crack that sent painful vibrations up my entire arm. The second strike came from behind before I'd recovered. I twisted desperately, felt the blade slice across my shoulder instead of sinking into my spine. Pain flared, hot and sharp and immediate. Blood ran down my back, soaking into my furs. The third warrior used my moment of distraction to sweep my legs out from under me. I went down hard. The impact with the frozen stone driving all the air from my lungs in a painful whoosh. A boot slammed into my ribs before I could recover. Once, twice, 3 times. I felt something crack inside my chest, felt the sharp pain that meant broken ribs. "Not so tough now, are you?" the leader said, standing over me with her blade pointed at my throat. "All the stories, all the fear, all the mystery. And you're just a half-trained Omega with delusions of grandeur and more luck than sense." She raised her blade for a killing strike, the metal catching the sunlight. "Any last words?" The power in my chest exploded outward. I didn't consciously trigger it. Didn't even know I could trigger it. Didn't understand what it was or how it worked. But the moment that blade started to descend toward my throat, the moment death became an immediate certainty rather than an abstract threat, something inside me reacted with overwhelming force. The world went white. Pure, blinding white that erased everything else. When my vision cleared, seconds later or minutes, I couldn't tell, all 3 elite warriors were on the ground. Not unconscious, not wounded, dead. Their eyes were open but completely vacant, staring at nothing. Blood trickled from their noses and ears, dark against the white snow. Their bodies were unmarked except for that blood. No visible wounds or trauma. And I was standing over them, completely unharmed except for the shoulder wound that was already healing, flesh knitting back together with visible speed. What the hell had just happened? I stared at my hands, looking for some sign of what I'd done, but they looked normal, felt normal. Except they'd just killed 3 elite warriors without touching them. I didn't have time to process it, didn't have time to figure out what it meant. More warriors were climbing up to my position, drawn by the sounds of fighting. I could hear them calling to each other, coordinating their approach. I ran. Higher, faster. My lungs burned with the effort, my broken ribs screaming protest with every breath, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The terrain grew rougher, more treacherous with every step. Ice-covered rocks that would send a normal wolf plummeting hundreds of feet to their death. Narrow ledges barely wide enough for one person, with sheer drops on either side. Places where one wrong step meant dying. Behind me, the pursuit continued, but it was thinning out. The warriors were having trouble with the extreme terrain, some falling back to find safer routes, others slipping and having to catch themselves before they fell. I used every advantage I had: speed, familiarity with the mountain, the enhanced strength that let me make jumps that should have been impossible. I reached the summit just as the sun hit its peak, flooding the mountaintop with harsh light that turned the ice into mirrors, and found Kyle waiting for me. He stood alone at the center of the flat summit, arms crossed over his chest, his winter steel eyes locked on me as I stumbled to a halt about 30 feet away. The wind howled around us, strong enough to make standing difficult, but he didn't move. Didn't even seem to notice it. He looked exactly as I remembered from the gathering, tall, powerful, built like violence given form, cold as the northern winds and twice as cutting. But there was something different in his expression now, not the casual dismissal he'd shown when he rejected me, not the cruel indifference when he'd watched me collapse in agony. This was focused intensity, calculation, assessment. He was taking me seriously now. The realization sent a spike of fierce satisfaction through my chest. "Naira," he said, my name sounding strange in his voice. He'd never actually said it before. At the gathering, he'd just called me her and she, like I wasn't worth the effort of a name. "Kyle," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady despite the pain radiating from my ribs and shoulder. We stared at each other across the distance, the wind screaming between us, carrying snow that stung like thrown sand. "You've become quite the problem," he said finally, his tone conversational, like we were discussing the weather instead of standing on a mountain where one of us was probably going to die. "You've become quite the regret," I shot back. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or anger, hard to tell with all that practiced coldness. "Regret?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just sharp edges. "You think I regret rejecting a weak Omega who would have dragged down my bloodline and embarrassed my pack? I think you regret not killing me when you had the chance." I took a step forward, watching his reaction. "Because now I'm strong enough that you had to bring 40 warriors just to flush me out. Strong enough that your people whisper my name in fear in the dark. Strong enough that you felt you had to handle me personally instead of sending more expendable wolves to do your dirty work." His jaw tightened, the only visible reaction. You killed 12 of my warriors, humiliated one of my betas in front of witnesses, threatened me directly on my own territory. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences for that kind of disrespect? I was hoping for consequences, was counting on them, actually. Another step forward. He didn't move back, but I saw his weight shift slightly. I wanted you to see what you threw away like garbage. Wanted you to understand, really understand deep in your bones, that rejecting me was the worst mistake of your life. Mistake? The word came out harsh. You're a feral thing playing at power you don't understand. An Omega who got lucky, killed a few desperate rogues, and convinced herself she's something special. Something worth my time and attention. If I'm not special, why are you here? I smiled, and I knew it wasn't nice. Why not send your warriors to handle me like you handle every other problem? Why face me yourself? Because you need to be put down publicly. Because every Omega in my territory needs to see what happens when one of them forgets their place. His eyes were cold as winter ice. Because you're threatening the entire structure that keeps our society functioning. You mean the structure that keeps alphas on top and omegas on the bottom. I mean the structure that's kept our people alive for thousands of years. By crushing anyone who might challenge it. By maintaining order. He took a step toward me now, closing the distance. You don't understand what you're doing, what you could unleash. If word spreads about what you are, what you can do, then maybe other Omegas will realize they don't have to accept being treated like property. Then the pacts will tear themselves apart in civil war. His control cracked, just for a moment, showing genuine anger underneath. You think you're some kind of revolutionary, but you're just a match thrown into dry kindling. And when the fire starts, everyone burns. Not just the alphas you hate. Everyone. Maybe some things need to burn. His expression went cold again, colder than before. You want to see real power, Omega? Not whatever accident of nature you've stumbled into, not whatever genetic fluke is letting you punch above your weight. I'll show you the difference between a true alpha and a broken thing pretending to be something she's not. The air around him shimmered. He shifted, not into full wolf form, into something between human and wolf. The hybrid form that only the strongest alphas could achieve and maintain. The form that required absolute control and immense power. I'd heard stories about it, whispered tales around fires about alphas who could become living weapons, combining human intelligence with wolf strength and speed. I'd never seen it before. It was absolutely terrifying. 7 feet of muscle and fur and claws, retaining human intelligence and bipedal mobility, while gaining the wolf's raw physical power and enhanced senses. His eyes glowed amber, and when he opened his mouth, the teeth were designed to tear through flesh and bone. He crossed the 30 feet between us in 3 bounds that shook the ground. I barely got my blade up in time to block the first strike. The impact sent me sliding backward across the ice, my feet struggling for purchase. The bone blade cracked under the force. The second strike came before I'd recovered from the first. Claws like knives raked across my chest, tearing through fur and skin and muscle. Blood sprayed across the white snow in an arc. The pain was indescribable. I went down hard, my vision going gray at the edges from shock and blood loss. Kale loomed over me in his hybrid form, even more massive up close, even more impossible. This is what real power looks like, he growled, his voice deeper and rougher in this form, but still unmistakably his. This is the difference between us, between what you are and what I am, between an Omega and an Alpha. He raised his clawed hand for a killing blow, and I could see my death in his eyes. And the power in my chest answered. It rose like a tidal wave, like a force of nature that had been held back too long. It crashed through my system with enough force to make me scream, my back arching off the ground. My bones felt like they were breaking and reforming simultaneously. My skin felt too tight, then too loose. Every nerve ending fired at once. The pain made what Kael had just done to me feel like nothing. And then suddenly, it was over. The pain cut off like someone had thrown a switch. I stood slowly, feeling different, changed. Wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. My perspective had shifted. I was taller, my center of gravity different, stronger, the muscles in my arms and legs thick with power. My senses had sharpened even beyond what they'd been, the world coming into almost painful focus. I looked down at my hands and saw claws. Fur. The same hybrid form Kael had taken. Impossible. Omegas couldn't do this. couldn't shift into hybrid form. It required power and control and pure alpha dominance that we simply didn't possess. It was biologically impossible, like asking a rabbit to grow wings. But I had done it. And from the absolute shock on Kael's face, the first genuine, unguarded emotion I'd ever seen from him, he knew exactly how impossible it was. "What are you?" he whispered, taking an unconscious step backward. "Something you created when you threw me away like I was nothing." My voice came out deeper, rougher, but still recognizably mine. Something that wouldn't exist if you'd just accepted the bond the moon gave us, if you'd just been less of a coward. "This isn't possible. Omegas can't achieve hybrid form. The biology doesn't support it. You shouldn't be able to—" "Can't what?" I took a step toward him, and he took another step back. "Can't be strong? Can't be powerful? Can't challenge alphas who think they own the world?" Another step. "Maybe you've been wrong about what Omegas are. Maybe we've all been wrong. Maybe we're only weak because you've spent centuries convincing us we are. You're an abomination. I'm what you made me." The fight that followed was brutal and desperate and ugly. We crashed together like avalanches colliding, all claws and teeth and raw power with no technique or grace. The mountain peak became our arena, and neither of us held back anything. He was bigger, more experienced in this form, had trained in it for years. But I was faster, angrier, fighting for something he couldn't possibly understand. Blood stained the pristine snow, his and mine, mixed together until you couldn't tell whose was whose. We tore chunks out of each other, broke bones, left trails of destruction across the summit. I got my claws around his throat and squeezed until he choked. He got his teeth into my shoulder and shook me like a rag doll. We fell together, rolled across the ice in a tangle of limbs, came up swinging. The fight could have gone either way. We were too evenly matched, both wounded too badly for it to last much longer. Until I heard the footsteps behind me. Multiple footsteps, heavy boots on stone. Warriors reaching the summit, drawn by the sounds of our battle. Kael's reinforcements had arrived. I had maybe 5 seconds before they joined the fight and turned the tide completely in his favor. 5 seconds to make a choice that would determine whether I lived or died. Keep fighting Kael, try to finish this now, and definitely die when his warriors overwhelm me through sheer numbers. Or run. Survive. Live to fight another day when the odds weren't quite so stacked against me. The power in my chest pulsed once, hard, as if offering an opinion on which choice would let it continue to grow. I looked at Kael, both of us bloodied and breathing hard, his eyes wide with something that might have been fear or respect or horrified fascination. "This isn't over," I said. Then I turned and ran. Not away from the mountain, which is what he'd expect. Toward the sheer cliff face on the north side. Toward 300 feet of empty air and certain death. "Stop her!" Kael roared behind me, his voice raw. "Don't let her reach the edge, she'll—" I jumped. Out into nothing, the ground falling away beneath me, the wind screaming in my ears. The warriors' shouts faded behind and above me as I fell. The ground rushed up to meet me with terrible speed, and at the last possible second, driven by pure instinct and desperate need, something inside me shifted again. Changed. Adapted to the threat. I hit the deep snow at the base of the cliff in full wolf form, something else that should have been impossible, shifting mid-fall, and rolled with the impact instead of shattering every bone in my body. Pain exploded through me anyway. Ribs that were already broken cracked further. Something in my left hind leg twisted wrong with an audible pop. My head slammed against something hard beneath the snow. But I was alive. Bleeding and broken, but alive. And even through the pain, I was running. Because staying still meant dying. Behind me, on the summit high above, I heard Kael screaming orders, heard the scramble and confusion as warriors tried to find a way down that didn't involve jumping off a cliff to their probable deaths. By the time they found a safe path, mapped out a route, and made it to the base, I'd be long gone. I ran until my wolf form gave out, the energy required to maintain it finally exceeding what my damaged body could provide. Then I stumbled the rest of the way in human form, naked and freezing and leaving a trail of blood across the frozen waste that any competent tracker could follow. But I kept moving. Had to keep moving. Made it back to my cave as the sun was setting, barely conscious. My body a comprehensive map of injuries that even my enhanced healing was struggling to address. Everything hurt. Everything was damaged, but I'd survived. I'd faced Kyle and survived. Terra was waiting inside the cave, sitting against the back wall like she'd been there for hours. "You look like shit," she said without preamble. "Feel worse." I collapsed against the cave wall, gasping, every breath sending sharp pains through my chest. "But I'm alive. That counts for something." I saw the fight, from a distance, through a scope I borrowed. She moved closer, her expression unreadable as she examined my wounds with clinical detachment. "You shifted into hybrid form, full transformation, perfect control, sustained it through an entire fight." She paused, her hand stilling on one of my deeper wounds. "How? I don't know." "That's not an Omega trait. That's not even a normal Alpha trait. Most Alphas train for years, sometimes decades, to achieve and maintain that form. And you just did it, under pressure, in the middle of a fight, like it was nothing." Her eyes were intense, searching my face. "What exactly are you, Nira?" "I don't know," I repeated, closing my eyes against the pain and exhaustion. "But whatever I am, Kyle knows now. He saw everything, and he's terrified. He should be." Terra pulled out supplies from somewhere, started cleaning my wounds with practiced efficiency. "Because what you did today, that's going to change everything. Everything. You just proved that everything the pacts believe about Omegas, everything they've built their entire society on, is a lie." She paused in her work, meeting my eyes. "You proved that we're not inherently weak, that we're not lesser, that the only thing keeping us down is belief and tradition and fear. That's not my fault, isn't it? You're the one who refused to die quietly when you were supposed to." She resumed cleaning my wounds, her touch rough but effective. "Now you have to deal with the consequences, because they're going to come for you harder now. Not just Kyle, all of them. Every pack, every Alpha who's built their power on keeping Omegas subjugated and compliant." She started wrapping bandages, her movements methodical. "Because if word spreads about what you can do, about what you are, about what you represent, Omegas across all the territories will hear about you. Some will be inspired. Some will try to replicate what you've done. Some will start asking questions that Alphas really don't want them asking. And the Alphas will respond with violence. They'll respond with genocide if they think they have to." Terra tied off a bandage tighter than necessary. "They'll crack down harder than ever before to maintain control and make sure no other Omega gets ideas. You've started something you can't stop now. Can't control." "That's not my responsibility. It became your responsibility the moment you survived what should have killed you." She sat back, studying me. "Now you have to finish it, one way or another. Either you lead the revolution you've started, or you die trying to escape the consequences." I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling me under like a tide. My last conscious thought was of Kyle's face when he'd seen me shift into hybrid form. The shock that had broken through his carefully maintained control, the fear underneath, the recognition that everything he'd believed about the natural order had just been shattered. And somewhere in the darkness, before sleep claimed me completely, before my consciousness finally gave up and shut down, I felt the power in my chest pulse once more. Still growing. Still changing me in ways I didn't understand, still waiting, preparing for what came next. Whatever that might be. I woke to voices, not the wind howling through the cave entrance, not Terra's rough pragmatism or my own ragged breathing. Actual voices, multiple of them, speaking in hushed tones just outside the cave. My eyes snapped open, and I was moving before my brain fully processed what was happening. Pain screamed through every part of my body. The wounds from Kyle were still healing, slower than they should have been. But I forced myself upright, bone blade in hand despite the way my ribs protested. Terra was already in the cave entrance, her body language tense, but not aggressive. She glanced back at me and made a subtle gesture. "Stay calm." "I'm telling you, she's in there," a young male voice said. Familiar. "I tracked her blood trail for 3 miles. This is where it ends." Finn. The young wolf I'd saved from the beating. "And I'm telling you, this is a terrible idea," another voice responded, older and female. "If the ghost wolf is in there, what makes you think she won't kill us the second we show our faces?" "Because she saved me when she didn't have to." Finn's voice was firm, despite the fear I could hear underneath. "She could have let Marcus beat me to death, but she didn't. That has to mean something. It means she was feeling merciful that particular day. Doesn't mean she'll feel the same way now. Then I'll go in alone. The hell you will. I caught Terra's eye and nodded. She stepped back from the entrance, giving me room. You can come in, I called out, my voice rougher than I wanted it to be. But if you're here to collect that bounty, you should know I'm in a really bad mood. Silence. Then footsteps, cautious and deliberate. Finn appeared first, ducking through the narrow entrance. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him. The split lip was healing, the bruises fading to yellow. Behind him came 3 others. 2 women and 1 man, all young, all wearing the simple clothes of pack omegas rather than warrior gear. They stopped just inside the cave entrance, staring at me with expressions that ranged from awe to terror. You look worse than I expected, Finn said finally. Despite everything, I laughed. It hurt. You should see the other guy. We did. One of the women stepped forward, small and slight, with dark hair pulled back in a braid. Half the territory saw what happened on that mountain, saw you fight Alpha Kyle in hybrid form and survive. She paused, her eyes intense. Saw you prove that Omegas aren't what they told us we were. I didn't prove anything, I said, leaning back against the cave wall because standing was taking too much energy. I just survived, that's all. You're being modest. The other woman spoke now, taller and broader than her companion, with scars on her arms that spoke to years of hard labor. You challenged the most powerful alpha in the territories and walked away alive. You shifted into a form we were told was biologically impossible for us. You've killed dozens of warriors and made Kyle himself afraid. He's not afraid of me. Afraid of... Yes, he is. Finn moved closer, his expression earnest. You should hear what they're saying in the pack house. The warriors who saw the fight, they're terrified. They saw you do things that shouldn't be possible, saw you match Kyle blow for blow. And they saw me run away at the end. They saw you survive a fight that should have killed you 10 times over. The small woman again. They saw you choose survival over pride, which is smarter than most alphas ever manage. I studied them, these 4 young Omegas who'd traveled miles into the outer territories to find me, who'd risked exile or worse just to have this conversation. Why are you here? I asked bluntly. Finn and the small woman exchanged glances. She nodded, and he turned back to me. Because word is spreading. About you. About what you can do. He took a breath. And Omegas across the territory are starting to ask questions. Starting to wonder if everything we've been told about our place in the pack is actually true. That's not my problem. Yes, it is. The small woman's voice was sharp. You made it your problem when you refused to die quietly. When you became a symbol whether you wanted to or not. I'm not a symbol. I'm just trying to survive. You're both. She moved closer, and I could see the fierce intelligence in her eyes. My name is Alara. I've been tracking stories about you for 2 weeks, piecing together what's real and what's rumor. And here's what I know. You're the first Omega in recorded history to achieve hybrid form. The first to kill multiple alphas in combat. The first to challenge pack hierarchy directly and survive. Lucky breaks in desperation, or evolution. Alara crouched down to my eye level. What if you're not an anomaly? What if you're just the first Omega to survive long enough in the right conditions to trigger something that's always been inside us? Something the packs have spent centuries suppressing? The words hit harder than they should have. You're saying other Omegas could do what I do? I'm saying we'll never know if we don't try. She gestured to the others. We came here to ask if you'll teach us. Show us how to access whatever power you've found. Help us become something more than what they've told us we're allowed to be. I stared at them, these desperate, hopeful faces. I can't teach you. I don't even understand what's happening to me. It's not like I trained for this or studied some ancient technique. I was thrown away to die, and something inside me refused to accept that. Then teach us to survive, Finn said. Teach us to fight, to defend ourselves, to stop accepting that we're lesser. You're asking me to start a war. We're asking you to finish what you started. Alara's voice was steady. The war began the moment you survived your exile, the moment you killed your first attacker, the moment you stood on that mountain and proved everything they believe about us is a lie. Terra, who'd been silent this whole time, spoke from her position by the entrance. She's right, you know. You've already started it. Now you get to decide if you're going to lead it or let it collapse into chaos. I looked at Terra, then at the 4 young Omegas watching me with something uncomfortably close to worship. This was insane. I wasn't a leader, wasn't a teacher. I was just an Omega who'd gotten angrier than she'd gotten dead. But looking at their faces, seeing the hope and determination there, it reminded me of myself 4 weeks ago. Broken and desperate and convinced I was worthless. And I remembered what it had felt like when nobody helped, when everyone turned their backs. "I can give you 1 week," I said finally. 1 week to teach you the basics of survival out here. How to fight, how to hunt, how to stay alive when everything's trying to kill you. After that, you're on your own. I'm not building an army, and I'm not leading a revolution." The relief and excitement on their faces was almost painful to see. "1 week is enough," Alara said. "It has to be." Terra caught my eye and shook her head slowly, but she didn't argue. We both knew I'd just made a decision that would change everything. The only question was whether it would change things for better or worse. The training started the next morning, as soon as I could stand without my ribs screaming. I took them to a clearing about a mile from my cave, far enough that we wouldn't draw attention to my actual shelter, close enough that I could retreat if my wounds gave out. They stood in a rough line, watching me with expressions ranging from determination to barely concealed terror. None of them had real combat experience. None of them had ever been allowed to train as warriors. They'd spent their lives being told that fighting wasn't for them, wasn't in their nature, would only get them hurt. Looking at them, I saw myself a month ago. "First lesson," I said, my voice carrying across the clearing. "Forget everything you've been told about what Omegas can and can't do. Every single limitation you've accepted, every rule you've internalized about your place in the pact structure, it's all designed to keep you weak and compliant. None of it is actually true." "But biology," the tall woman started, "is not destiny," I cut her off. "Yes, alphas are generally bigger and stronger. Yes, they have physical advantages, but size isn't everything in a fight, and strength means nothing if you can't land a hit." I gestured to Finn, who was the biggest of the four. "You, attack me." His eyes went wide. "What? No, I can't." "You can and you will. Come at me like you mean it, or this whole thing is a waste of time." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of attacking someone who'd saved his life. But after a moment, he settled into a clumsy fighting stance and moved forward. Too slow, too predictable, telegraphing his intentions with every movement. I waited until he was committed to his punch, then stepped inside his reach and used his own momentum to flip him onto his back. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. "See?" I said, not unkindly. Size didn't matter, strength didn't matter. What mattered was speed and leverage and understanding how bodies move. I offered him a hand and pulled him up. "That's what I'm going to teach you. Not how to overpower opponents. You'll never be able to do that against most alphas, but how to use their size and strength against them. How to turn their advantages into weaknesses." For the next 3 hours, I ran them through basic techniques. How to fall without breaking bones. How to use leverage to throw opponents twice their size. Where to strike to cause maximum damage. Throat, knees, eyes, joints. How to read an opponent's body language and anticipate attacks. They were terrible at first, clumsy and hesitant and afraid of hurting each other. But they learned fast, driven by desperation and hope, and the intoxicating possibility that they might actually be capable of defending themselves. Watching them start to move with more confidence, seeing the fear in their eyes gradually replaced by determination, it stirred something in my chest that had nothing to do with the power that lived there. Maybe Alara was right. Maybe I had started something that couldn't be stopped. By the 4th day, word had spread. 7 more Omegas showed up at the clearing, having somehow tracked us down. Then 12 more the day after that. By the end of the week, I was training 23 wolves in the basics of combat and survival. 23 Omegas who'd risked everything, exile, punishment, death, to learn how to fight back. Terra watched from the sidelines, her expression unreadable. "You know this can't stay secret much longer," she said during a break. "Kale's scouts will notice. They'll report back. And then he'll have to respond because every day this continues is another day his authority looks weak." "I know." "And you're doing it anyway. I'm doing it because it matters." I watched the group practicing throws, helping each other up when they fell, actually laughing despite the exhaustion and bruises. Because for the first time, these wolves believe they're worth defending, worth fighting for. Noble sentiment. Won't stop you from dying when Kael sends his army. Maybe not. I turned to look at her. But at least I'll die trying to change something instead of just surviving for survival's sake. Terra was quiet for a long moment. You sound like I did 5 years ago, right before the territories broke me. I'm not you. No. You're stronger, meaner, more dangerous. She met my eyes, which is why you'll probably survive what's coming. The question is whether they will. She gestured to the training Omegas. I didn't have an answer for that. The attack came on the 8th day, not Kael's full force, just a scouting party of 6 warriors sent to verify the rumors that Omegas were training in the outer territories. They found us in the clearing mid-session, 23 Omegas and me working through close-quarters combat techniques. The lead warrior, a beta I didn't recognize, stepped into the clearing with his hand on his weapon. What the hell is this? He demanded, his eyes scanning the group with something between confusion and disgust. I stepped forward, putting myself between him and my students. Private training session. Nothing that concerns you. Private training for Omegas in combat techniques? He laughed, harsh and ugly. That concerns everyone. You're violating about a dozen pact laws, and that's before we get to the part where you're a wanted criminal. Then arrest me. His hand tightened on his weapon. Alpha Kael wants you brought back, alive if possible, dead if necessary. Come and try. He drew his blade, and his 5 companions followed suit. 6 trained warriors against 1 wounded Omega. Except I wasn't alone anymore. Before I could move, before I could tell them to run or hide or stay back, my students stepped forward. All 23 of them, forming a loose line between me and the warriors. You'll have to go through us first, Alara said, her voice steady despite the fear I could smell on her. The beta stared at them in disbelief. Are you serious? You're Omegas. You can't fight warriors. It's not... Not what? Finn interrupted. Not natural? Not our place? We've heard it all before, heard it our whole lives, and we're done listening. The beta's expression darkened. Stand down. All of you. Last warning before we make this ugly. They didn't move. And in that moment, watching these Omegas who'd spent their lives being told they were weak, now standing firm against armed warriors, I felt something shift in my chest. The power that had been growing there, that had saved me and changed me and turned me into something new, it pulsed once, hard, like a heartbeat. And I understood. It wasn't just about me. Had never been just about me. It was about all of us. Stand down, I said quietly to my students. This is my fight. No. Alara didn't look back at me. It's all of ours. That's the whole point, isn't it? That we're done fighting alone? The warriors attacked. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a revelation. My students fought like hell, fought like wolves who'd finally found something worth fighting for. They used everything I'd taught them, leverage and speed and targeting weak points. They worked together, covering each other's backs, coordinating attacks. And they won, not easily, not cleanly. 3 of my students went down with injuries that would take days to heal. But when the dust settled, all 6 warriors were on the ground, disarmed and breathing hard. We'd won. 23 Omegas with a week of training had defeated 6 experienced warriors. The beta stared up at us from the ground, blood running from his nose, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. This isn't possible, he whispered. Omegas can't. Finish that sentence and I'll break your jaw, Alara said, standing over him with his own blade in her hand. We just proved what we can do. We can do whatever the hell we want. I moved forward, crouching down to the beta's eye level. Go back to Kael, I said quietly. Tell him what you saw here. Tell him that Omegas are done accepting what he says we are. And tell him that if he wants to stop this, he's going to have to do better than 6 scouts. He'll send an army. Good. We'll be ready. We let them go, watched them stumble away carrying their wounded. When they were gone, my students turned to me with expressions of shock and exhilaration and triumph. We did it, Finn breathed. We actually did it. You did it, I corrected. I just showed you how. The courage to actually stand and fight? That was all you. Alara was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. I didn't think I could. None of us did, the tall woman said. That was the whole problem. We believed them when they said we were weak. And now? I asked. She met my eyes, and her smile was fierce. Now we know better. The celebration was short-lived. We all knew what was coming, knew that letting those warriors go was the same as declaring war, that Kael would have to respond, and his response would be overwhelming. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid, because I wasn't alone anymore. Over the next 3 days, more Omegas arrived. Some from Ironclaw, sneaking away in the night. Some from neighboring packs, having heard rumors of what was happening in the outer territories. They came in ones and twos and small groups, risking everything for a chance to learn what we were teaching. By the end of the week, I had 47 students. 47 Omegas who'd chosen to fight rather than accept their assigned place in pack hierarchy. Terra helped me train them, her 5 years of survival experience proving invaluable. Between the two of us, we turned frightened Omegas into something resembling an actual fighting force. Not an army, not yet, but a beginning. On the 15th day, a messenger arrived. Not a warrior. A young male Omega from Ironclaw, barely out of his teens, shaking with fear and cold. "I have a message," he stammered. "From Alpha Kael, for Naira Hale." I stepped forward. "I'm listening." He swallowed hard, clearly terrified to be delivering this message. "Alpha Kael challenges you to single combat. Tomorrow at midday, at the Gathering Grounds. If you win, he'll acknowledge your right to exist outside pack structure and cease all hostile actions against you and your followers. And if he wins, you and everyone with you submits to pack authority and faces judgment for rebellion." The clearing went silent. "That's a trap," Terra said immediately. "He's not going to honor any deal. The second you show up, he'll have you surrounded and executed." "Probably," I agreed. "But what choice do I have? If I don't show, he'll come here with his full force and slaughter everyone. If you do show, he'll kill you." "Maybe, or maybe I'll kill him." I looked at the messenger. "Tell Kael I accept, midday tomorrow, just him and me." The messenger nodded and fled, clearly relieved to be leaving. My students erupted in protest, all talking at once, trying to convince me this was suicide. I raised my hand for silence. This was always going to come down to Kael and me. The bond we rejected, the power that came from that rejection, it all leads back to him. I looked around at the faces watching me. And if I can beat him publicly, in front of witnesses from multiple packs, it proves everything we've been saying, proves that Omegas aren't what they told us we were. "And if you lose?" Alara asked quietly. "Then you run. All of you. Scatter into the territories, use everything I've taught you to survive, and keep spreading the truth. Keep training others, keep fighting." That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. I spent that night preparing, checking my weapons, treating my wounds, trying to ignore the fear that kept trying to claw its way up my throat. Terra found me as the sun was setting. "You know this is insane, right?" I've been told. "He's had 2 weeks to heal from your last fight. You're still recovering from injuries that should have killed you. The odds are terrible." "I know." I looked at her. "But what else can I do? Run and let him hunt down everyone who believed in me? Keep hiding in the territories and watch as he crushes any Omega who dares to question pack hierarchy? You could survive. That's what you're good at. I'm tired of just surviving. I want to actually live. Want to build something that matters." Terra was quiet for a long moment. "If you do this and actually win, everything changes. Not just for you, for every Omega in every pack. The whole structure of our society will have to be rethought." "I know. And if you lose, the backlash will be brutal. Kael will crack down harder than ever before to make sure no other Omega gets ideas." "I know that too," she sighed. "Then I guess there's nothing left to say except don't die." "I'll do my best." She gripped my shoulder once, hard, then walked away into the darkness. I stood alone, looking up at the stars, and felt the power in my chest pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. The gathering grounds looked different in daylight. The bonfire pit was cold and empty. The carefully arranged stones that marked pack territories sat silent. The place where I'd been broken and rejected was just a clearing now, empty of the crowds that had made it feel significant. But it wouldn't be empty for long. I arrived early, alone as agreed, wearing simple clothes and carrying only my bone blade. Kael was already there, standing in the center of the clearing with his arms crossed. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall, powerful, cold as winter. Behind him, arranged in a wide semicircle, stood what had to be 200 wolves, warriors from Ironclaw and several other packs, here to witness the challenge. On the opposite side of the clearing, a smaller group had gathered. My students, along with other Omegas who'd heard what was happening and come to watch. Maybe 50 of them, looking terrified and hopeful in equal measure. The entire scene felt surreal. 1 month ago, I'd stood in this same clearing and been destroyed. Now I was back, and everything was different. Kale and I stared at each other across the distance. "I'm surprised you came," he said finally. "Thought you might run." "I'm done running." "Good, then this will be quick." We moved toward each other, closing the distance until we stood maybe 10 feet apart. "Before we do this," Kael said quietly, "I want you to understand something. What you've started, teaching Omegas to fight, challenging pack hierarchy, it can't be allowed to continue. Not because I'm cruel or because I enjoy subjugating people, but because it threatens the stability that keeps our society functioning. Your society is built on lies. Maybe, but it's kept our people alive for thousands of years. What you're offering, revolution, chaos, upheaval, it'll get people killed, more than you can imagine. Living on your knees isn't the same as being alive." His jaw tightened. "Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss." He shifted into hybrid form in one smooth motion, the transformation instant and controlled. I followed, feeling my body change and grow, feeling the power surge through me. We crashed together in the center of the clearing and the fight began. This time it was different. I was stronger, faster, more controlled than I'd been on the mountain. The past 2 weeks of training others had somehow trained me too, forcing me to understand my own capabilities better. And Kael, for all his experience and power, was fighting something he didn't understand. We traded blows that would have killed normal wolves, claws raked across flesh, teeth found purchase. Blood stained the ground. But neither of us went down. The fight stretched on, 5 minutes, 10, 15. Far longer than any normal combat between alphas. The watching crowds were silent, transfixed. I could see the strain in Kael's eyes, the growing realization that he couldn't overpower me through sheer force. And I could feel something else happening. The power in my chest was responding to the fight, growing stronger with each exchange, as if the conflict itself was feeding it. Finally, I saw my opening. Kael overextended on a strike, putting too much weight forward. I dropped low, swept his legs, and used his momentum to drive him into the ground. My claws found his throat, pressed against the vulnerable flesh there. One squeeze, and he'd be dead. The clearing was absolutely silent. I could feel his pulse racing under my claws, could see the shock in his eyes, not that I'd gotten the upper hand, but that I wasn't immediately using it to kill him. "Yield," I said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "What?" "Yield. Acknowledge what I've proven here, or die. Your choice." He stared up at me, breathing hard. "If I yield, the packs will see me as weak. If you die, they won't see you at all." I pressed harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "I don't want to kill you, Kael. I just want you to admit the truth. That Omegas aren't what you've told us we are. That we're capable of everything alphas are if we're just given the chance." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he tapped his hand against the ground twice. The traditional signal of submission. I released him and stepped back, shifting to human form. The Omega section of the crowd erupted in cheers. The warriors stood in shocked silence. Kael stood slowly, also shifting back to human form, his hand at his throat where my claws had drawn blood. "You've won," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The challenge is yours. You and your followers are granted autonomy outside pack structure." He paused, meeting my eyes. "But know this. What you've started today will have consequences none of us can predict. You've shattered something that's been in place for millennia. Whatever comes next, for good or ill, is on you." "I know," I said, "and I accept that responsibility." He nodded once, then turned and walked away, his warriors following in his wake. I stood alone in the center of the clearing as my students rushed forward, surrounding me with celebration and tears and fierce hugs. We'd done it. We'd actually done it, changed everything. And looking at their faces, seeing the hope and pride and newfound confidence there, I finally understood what I'd become. Not just a survivor, not just a fighter, a symbol, a leader, a beginning of something new. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The celebration lasted through the night, but I barely participated. While my students danced and laughed and cried with relief around the bonfire they'd built in the clearing, I sat apart, watching. My body ached from the fight with Kael, but it was more than physical exhaustion weighing me down. It was the sudden, crushing realization of what I'd actually done. I'd challenged the entire foundation of pact society and won, and now I had to figure out what the hell came next. "You look like someone who just realized she's in over her head." Terra settled beside me, offering a flask that smelled like cheap alcohol and regret. I took it anyway, the burn down my throat grounding me. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted quietly. "I know how to survive, know how to fight, but leading, building something that lasts, I have no idea where to even start." "Good." I looked at her in surprise. "Leaders who think they have all the answers are dangerous," she continued, staring into the fire. "They stop listening, stop adapting. You knowing you're out of your depth? That's actually an advantage as long as you're smart about it." "How do I be smart about building a new society from scratch?" "You don't build it from scratch. You build it with them." She gestured toward the celebrating Omegas. "You listen to what they need, what they've lived through, what they dream about, and you help them build it together." That sounds impossibly idealistic. Maybe. But what's the alternative? Becoming what you fought against? Deciding you know what's best for everyone and enforcing it through power? She took the flask back, drank deeply. "You've got a choice right now. You can be the first Omega Alpha, just another tyrant with a different face. Or you can actually try to build something better." I watched Alara teaching a group of younger Omegas one of the defensive techniques I'd shown her, her movements confident now where they'd been hesitant 2 weeks ago. Watched Finn laughing with companions who'd probably spent their whole lives being told laughter was inappropriate for their station. "I don't want to rule anyone," I said finally. "I just want them to be free." "Then make that the foundation. Freedom, choice, the right to determine your own path." Terra stood, brushing dirt from her pants. "And be prepared for how messy that gets. Freedom's a lot harder than obedience." She walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the distant sound of celebration. The first real challenge came 3 days later. We'd moved our camp to a more permanent location, a valley about 5 miles into the outer territories with water, shelter, and enough space for the nearly 100 Omegas who'd joined us. It wasn't comfortable, but it was ours. I was helping construct one of the larger shelters when Ilara found me, her expression troubled. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind with teeth." She gestured toward the edge of camp where a small crowd had gathered. "2 of our people got into a fight. One of them is injured pretty badly." I dropped the logs I'd been carrying and followed her. The crowd parted as I approached, revealing 2 young males I recognized from Ironclaw. One was on the ground clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. The other stood over him, breathing hard, knuckles bloody. "What happened?" I demanded. "He stole from me," the standing one spat, pointing at the injured wolf. "Took food from my shelter. My rations." "I was hungry," the other gasped. "You had extra. I had nothing. So you just take what's mine. That's theft. It's survival." They started shouting over each other, and the crowd joined in, people taking sides, the noise escalating into chaos. "Enough!" My voice cut through the commotion, and everyone went silent. "Someone get him to the healer. Now!" 2 wolves helped the injured one to his feet and guided him away. I turned to the other. "You, come with me." I led him to the edge of camp, away from the crowd, aware that Alara and several others were following at a discreet distance. "You want to explain what happened?" I asked when we were alone. "I already told you. He stole—" "I know what he did. I'm asking why you nearly beat him to death over it." He looked confused by the question. "Because that's the punishment for theft. That's pack law. Always has been." "We're not in a pack anymore." "Then what are we?" And there it was. The question I'd been avoiding. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But we're not going to operate on the same rules that kept us down for our entire lives. We're building something different. Different how? We still need rules, still need consequences. Otherwise, it's just chaos." He wasn't wrong. And looking at his frustrated, confused face, I realized this was the real challenge. Not fighting Kale or surviving the territories, but figuring out how to actually live together without falling back into the same patterns that had broken us. You're right, I said. We need structure, but it has to be structure we create together, not structure imposed from above. That sounds nice, but what does it actually mean? It means we figure it out together, all of us. I raised my voice so the watching crowd could hear. Tonight, after dinner, everyone gathers. We're going to talk about how we want to live, what rules we need, how we handle disputes, everything. You're asking us to decide? Someone called out from the crowd. I'm asking us to decide together because this isn't my community to rule. It's ours to build. The meeting that night was chaos. 100 voices all trying to speak at once, everyone with opinions about what laws we needed and how things should work. Some wanted strict rules and harsh punishments. Others wanted complete freedom with no consequences. Most fell somewhere in between, confused and uncertain. I let them argue for an hour before calling for order. Here's what I think, I said, standing so everyone could see me. We can't just copy pact law because pact law was designed to keep most of us powerless. But we can't have no rules at all because that leads to the strong dominating the weak, which is what we're trying to escape. I paused, gathering my thoughts. So here's what I propose. 3 core principles. First, everyone has the right to basic survival, food, shelter, safety. We share resources and protect each other. Second, no one rules by force. Decisions that affect everyone get made by everyone. And third, you're free to leave anytime you want. This is a choice, not a prison. What about punishment? Someone called out. What happens when people break the rules? We figure it out case by case, but the goal isn't punishment for punishment's sake. It's restoration, making things right, healing harm. That's weak, a voice challenged from the back. An older Omega I didn't recognize well. People need to fear consequences or they'll just do whatever they want. Maybe, I acknowledged. Or maybe people mostly do harmful things when they're desperate or scared or haven't been taught better. Maybe if we address those root causes, we won't need fear to keep us in line. The debate raged for another 2 hours. But slowly, painfully, we started to find common ground. Started to build something that resembled a shared vision. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean or elegant, but it was ours. The real test came 2 weeks later when scouts reported a large group approaching from the south. 50 wolves, maybe more, armed, moving with purpose toward our settlement. It's Shadow Peak, the scout gasped, having run the whole way back. Alpha Marcus is leading them personally. The camp erupted into panic. Shadow Peak was one of the largest packs in the territories, and Marcus was known for his aggression and his hatred of anything that threatened traditional pack structure. He's coming to destroy us, someone shouted, to make an example before other Omegas get ideas. We should run. We should fight. We should surrender and hope for mercy. Quiet. I climbed onto a boulder so everyone could see me. Nobody's running and nobody's surrendering. We're going to meet them and we're going to talk. Talk. Alara stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Marcus doesn't talk. He dominates or he destroys. Then we'll have to convince him there's a third option. I took 30 volunteers, everyone who'd been with me from the beginning, everyone whose combat training was solid enough to hold their ground if talking failed. We marched out to meet Shadow Peak at the border of our territory. Marcus was waiting exactly where the scouts had said he'd be. A massive alpha, bigger even than Kyle, with silver streaking his dark hair and scars covering his arms. He looked like he'd spent his entire life fighting and winning. Behind him, his warriors stood in perfect formation. Behind me, my ragtag group of Omegas tried to look confident and mostly succeeded. "Nira hail," Marcus called out when we were close enough. "The Omega who defeated Kyle Draven in single combat. I had to see you for myself." "Here I am." He studied me with sharp, calculating eyes. "You've caused quite a disruption. Omegas across 3 territories are abandoning their packs to join you. Pack structure is destabilizing. Alphas are worried. Good. They should be." His eyebrow raised. Bold words for someone outnumbered 2-1. "Numbers don't mean much if you're fighting for the wrong reasons. My people are fighting for freedom, for the right to exist on our own terms. What are your warriors fighting for? Because you told them to?" Something flickered in his expression. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" "I think violence is what you expect." what you're comfortable with. But what if I offered you something better? I'm listening. An alliance. Shadow Peak and our settlement. You recognize our autonomy, our right to exist outside pact structure. In exchange, we share resources, trade knowledge, and defend each other against common threats. He laughed, loud and sharp. Why would I ally with rogue omegas when I could just crush you and restore order? Because order isn't the same as stability. You can crush us, sure, but you can't crush the idea we represent. More omegas will rebel. More violence will spread. The territories will tear themselves apart. I took a step forward. Or you can be the first alpha to acknowledge that the old ways don't work anymore, that a new system is emerging whether you like it or not, and you can choose to be part of building something better instead of dying to defend something broken. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned to his second-in-command, a female beta with intelligent eyes. What do you think? I think she has a point, the beta said quietly. We've had 3 Omega rebellions in the past month alone, all inspired by her. We can't kill our way out of this. Marcus was quiet, thinking. Behind me, I could feel my people holding their breath. One condition, he said finally. You prove your settlement can actually function, can actually survive without descending into chaos. 6 months. If you're still here, still stable, still free, then we talk alliance. And in the meantime, we leave you alone. No raids, no harassment, but no help either. You succeed or fail on your own merits. I extended my hand. Deal. He stared at it for a moment, then gripped it firmly. His hand was rough and calloused, the hand of a warrior who'd spent decades fighting. Don't make me regret this, he said quietly. Don't make me regret trusting you. He nodded once, then turned and led his warriors away. When they were gone, my people erupted in cheers and tears of relief. But I just stood there, watching Shadow Peak retreat, and realized what I'd actually done. Bought us 6 months. 6 months to prove we could build something that worked. 6 months to not screw this up. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Harder than surviving the outer territories. Harder than fighting Kael. Because survival was simple. You lived or you died. Building a functioning society was infinitely more complicated. We had disputes over resources, over relationships, over responsibilities. We had people who wanted to leave and people who wanted different rules and people who just wanted things to be easier. I made mistakes, made decisions that turned out wrong, trusted people who betrayed that trust, pushed too hard in some areas and not hard enough in others. But slowly, painfully, we figured it out. We built structures, not hierarchies, but systems of organization that let people contribute according to their abilities and receive according to their needs. We created councils to handle disputes, rotated leadership responsibilities so no one person held power too long. We trained everyone in combat and survival, but also in healing, in building, in teaching. We became something new. Not a pack, not exactly, but a community, a chosen family. And word continued to spread. More Omegas came, fleeing pack structures that suddenly felt too restrictive, too limiting. Some stayed. Some left after a while, discovering that freedom was harder than they'd expected. Some went back to their packs and started pushing for changes from within. The territories were transforming, and we were at the center of it. On the 6-month anniversary of our settlement's founding, Marcus returned. This time he came with only 5 companions, and they were unarmed. I met him at the border with Elara and Terra, the 3 of us representing our community's leadership council. He looked around at our settlement, the permanent structures we'd built, the training grounds, the central gathering space, the garden plots we'd started preparing for spring planting. You've survived, he said simply. We've done more than survive. We've thrived. So I see. He turned back to me. I'm prepared to honor our agreement. Shadow Peak will formally recognize your settlement's autonomy. We'll establish trade relations and a mutual defense pact. Under what terms? That you continue to respect our borders, that you don't actively recruit from our pack, and that you share any innovations or techniques you develop that could benefit all wolves. The third one goes both ways? It does. I glanced at Elara and Terra. They both nodded. Then we have an agreement. This handshake felt different from the first one, more solid, more real. I have a question, Marcus said, as his warriors began formal protocols to document the alliance. What you've built here, this Omega settlement, this new way of living, what's the end game? What do you actually want? I thought about it for a moment. I want every Omega to have a choice. To stay in pact structure if that's what they prefer, or to leave and build something different. I want alphas to understand that domination isn't the only way to organize society. And I want the pups born in our community to grow up never knowing what it feels like to be told they're lesser because of what they are. That's revolution. That's evolution. Society changes or it dies. We're just helping it change in a direction that's more humane. He nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're right. The old ways are breaking. Have been for a while. We've just been too stubborn to acknowledge it. And now? Now some of us are ready to try something different. As Marcus and his warriors left to formalize the alliance, I felt something shift in my chest. The power that had been growing there since my rejection, that had saved my life and changed me and made me stronger. It pulsed once, gently, and then settled, like it had completed its purpose, like it was satisfied with what I'd become. That night, we held a celebration, not just for the alliance, but for everything we'd built, for surviving 6 months that most people thought we wouldn't last 6 weeks. I found myself standing apart again, watching, but this time Alara joined me instead of Terra. "You know the thing I'm most grateful for?" she said quietly. "What's that? That you didn't become what we escaped from. You had all the power, all the authority. You could have built this place with you at the top, everyone else beneath you. But you didn't. I didn't want power. I wanted freedom. And you gave it to all of us." She was quiet for a moment. "I heard Finn talking earlier. He said something interesting. He said, you didn't save us. You showed us how to save ourselves." "He's not wrong." "I know. That's what makes it so powerful." She smiled. "A year ago, I was convinced I was worthless, that Omegas were inherently weak and our place was to serve. Now I'm on a leadership council, teaching combat, helping build a new society. You changed my entire understanding of what I'm capable of. You did that yourself. I just got you started." "Maybe, but you got us all started. And now we're going to keep going, keep building, keep showing the territories what's possible." She returned to the celebration, and I was alone again with my thoughts. A year ago, I'd stood in these territories ready to die. Broken by rejection, convinced I was worthless, certain that my story was over. Now I stood here having built something that mattered, having changed not just my own life, but the lives of hundreds of others, having proven that the wolves who threw me away were wrong about everything. And the irony was that none of it would have happened if Kael hadn't rejected me. The thought made me laugh, soft and bitter. As if summoned by my thoughts, I caught a familiar scent on the wind. Kael. He emerged from the darkness at the edge of camp, alone and unarmed, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. My first instinct was to call for guards. My second was to attack him myself. I did neither. "You shouldn't be here," I said when he was close enough to hear. "I know, but I needed to see it for myself, what you've built." Satisfied? Humbled, actually. He looked around the camp, taking in the structures, the people, the evidence of our thriving community. "I was wrong about you, about what Omegas are capable of, about everything." "I know. I came to apologize." That actually surprised me. Apologize? For rejecting you, for how I treated you, for being too blind and arrogant to see what the bond was offering me. He met my eyes, and for the first time I saw genuine regret there. "You would have made me better, would have challenged me to be more than just a warlord maintaining power through force, and I threw that away because I was afraid." Afraid of what? Of what it meant. That the moon would pair me, the strongest alpha in the territories, with an Omega. It challenged everything I believed about strength and power and natural order. So I rejected it, rejected you, chose certainty over growth. He paused. It was the worst decision of my life. Part of me wanted to gloat, to throw his words back in his face, to make him hurt the way he'd hurt me. But standing here, looking at this powerful alpha admitting he was wrong, I just felt tired. "The bond is gone," I said quietly. "Severed. That part of our story is over." "I know. I'm not here trying to reclaim something I destroyed. I'm here to acknowledge my mistake and tell you that what you've built here, it's important. It matters. And Ironclaw won't stand in your way. What about the other packs? The ones who see us as a threat? I'll talk to them. Use whatever influence I have to buy you space to keep building. He smiled, sad and tired. It's the least I can do to repair the damage I've caused. Why? Why help us now? Because you were right. About everything. The old ways are broken, and we need something better. And watching you build it has shown me what better could look like. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Of what you've become. You're stronger than I ever could have made you. He disappeared into the darkness, and I stood there processing what had just happened. Kyle Draven had apologized, had acknowledged I was right, had offered to help protect what we'd built. The vindication I'd thought I wanted felt hollow, because I'd moved past needing his approval or acknowledgement. I'd built something real, something that mattered, and it had nothing to do with him anymore. He was just another alpha trying to adapt to a changing world, and I was the one who'd changed it. The celebration continued around me, voices raised in song and laughter. My people, my chosen family, the community we'd built together from nothing but determination and hope. Terra appeared beside me one last time. You know what's funny? She said. What? A year ago, you were the weakest Omega in the territories. Worthless. Rejected. Left to die. I remember. Now you're the most powerful wolf here. Not because of strength or combat ability, though you've got plenty of both, but because you've inspired people, given them hope, shown them a different way to live. She paused. You've become exactly what KL feared, an Omega who's more powerful than any Alpha, just not in the way he expected. I don't feel powerful. I feel exhausted and terrified I'm going to screw this up. Good. That means you're doing it right. She gripped my shoulder. You know what you've really done here? You've proven that power doesn't have to mean domination. That strength can be used to lift people up instead of holding them down. That being rejected by someone who couldn't see your worth doesn't define your value. It almost killed me. But it didn't, and that's the whole point, isn't it? They threw you away and you didn't just survive. You thrived. You transformed. You became something none of them expected or prepared for. She was right. The Omega who'd stood in the gathering grounds accepting rejection as inevitable was gone, dead and buried in the frozen territories. What had emerged was someone new, someone stronger, someone who understood that real power wasn't about dominating others, but about empowering them to dominate themselves. I looked out at the community we'd built, at the Omegas who'd found freedom and purpose, at the structures and systems we'd created together, at the future we were building. This was my revenge. Not killing Kyle or destroying Ironclaw, but proving that everything they believed about Omegas was a lie. That we could be strong, could be leaders, could build something better than what they'd offered us. That being thrown away was the best thing that had ever happened to me, because it forced me to discover who I really was beneath all the lies they'd taught me to believe about myself. The music swelled around me and someone called my name, inviting me to join the celebration. I went. Because this wasn't about standing apart anymore, watching from a distance. This was about being part of something, building something, living instead of just surviving. And as I danced with my people under the stars in the settlement we'd built together, I realized something profound. I'd spent my whole life being told my story didn't matter, that Omegas were supporting characters in someone else's narrative, but I'd written my own story instead. A story about rejection and survival and transformation. About refusing to accept what others said I was and discovering what I actually could be. About taking the worst moment of my life and turning it into the catalyst for something revolutionary. They'd tried to end my story at the gathering. Instead, they'd just given it a better beginning. And the rest, the survival, the power, the community, the change, that was all me. The Omega they threw away had become the wolf they'd learned to fear and respect in equal measure. Not because I'd become like them, but because I'd become something better, something free. And that freedom, that refusal to be defined by their limitations, that was my true power. That was my revenge. That was my triumph. I was Naira Hale, rejected Omega, survivor, revolutionary, leader. And I was just getting started,